Recording has started.
I will call this meeting to order. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Brown, Chairman of the Board of Finance, and welcome to our virtual special meeting. It's Monday, May 11th. Can we please all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
to the
United States of America, for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, again, good evening. We go right to item number 3, public executive session, and our budget vote. There will be no public comment. So before we get started, I would just like to state my thanks and appreciation for all the work that has gone into the budget during these very trying, difficult, and uncertain times. My appreciation to the Town Finance Department, the Board of Ed, Linda Gardner, the administration, the department heads, and the board members. Just a special recognition to Linda Gardner, as this will be her last budget meeting, and her expertise and knowledge will certainly be missed. So Linda, we wish you a long, healthy retirement in November, right? Starting in November. So tonight is not a night for debate, but we're here to vote. Therefore, given this is executive session, only board members will be recognized to speak unless they have a specific question to someone not on the board to answer. We are aware as a board of the economic times and how we need to be cognizant of the impact that these extraordinary times have had and are having on taxpayers. There is going to be shared sacrifice as our board recognizes the economic challenges. So we are changing the meeting order from past years and are going to address some of the more obscure items up front. The items that the Board of Finance cares deeply about, has managed closely, and has built up for extraordinary circumstances such as these, meaning our long-term funds to meet our long-term liabilities. So we are going to start with Retiree Benefits, which is on page 270. So if our board could take the budget books out and go to page 270. Now, we have with us Mr. Matt Sperndell. Mrs. Sperndell is our financial advisor. And I'm going to begin by asking Matt a question. Matt, just the overall assessment of the rating calls you have participated on since 3/11. Can you just give us an overall assessment of those rating calls, please?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me. As the town's municipal advisor, financial advisor for bond issues, we've been obviously very active with the town over the years in dealing with the rating agencies, but also specifically in the last month and a half, we've been dealing with quite a bit of volatility and a shock to the municipal system. And what we've really seen is over the last month, really, because since March 11th, the market pretty much shut down for a couple of weeks, and municipals really weren't able to get into the market effectively. Since then, we've obviously, that's changed, and we're back, and I mean, the town was able to get the refunding done and at great rates. But what we've really seen in the last month and a half-ish is a 100% focus on obviously credit fundamentals, but also what the potential impacts might be with regard to COVID-19 and how that could impact things like cash flows, finances, budgets, pensions, economic activity, grand list. I mean, the list goes on and on. Of course, there's many variables that are yet to be determined, and we really will be dealing with these things for the next, at least from a credit perspective, probably for the next couple of years, because these things are going to impact potentially next year's CAFR and the year after that's budget. But we've seen a lot of the conversations geared towards that, obviously. And I will say that with respect to the outcomes of the rating calls that we've had, unfortunately, of the maybe that I've personally been involved in at least a half dozen, maybe 8 or so in the last few weeks, they've all maintained the rating. So we haven't felt any negative rating downgrades in the last month or so. Fortunately, a lot of the issuers I work with are along the same lines generally as Fairfield and AAA, high AA rated credits, and the rating agencies have a little bit more confidence, I think, in the positioning of those highly rated credits to weather the storm. And so we've been fortunate that we haven't seen any downgrades. But there is a lot of concern, and they will be monitoring and asking about that and want to see how those potential impacts affect, like I said, the cash flows, next year's budget, next year's audit report, and so on and so forth. So it's oftentimes an issuer asks, like, what's the hot topic, this time around when we're talking about ratings, and it's been different things over the years, and I think right now it's the COVID, and I think it will be for at least a year, 18 months to come.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Questions from the board? So, Matt, during these calls, they're focusing on COVID and how, it affects us as a town. Are they looking for specifics, and as far as our fund balances? Is that what they're going to watch closely?
Well, I think, there's certain things that the town can control more than other things. So, for instance, you can't necessarily control your grand list growth from year to year as well, or your income levels and so on. But you can control your fund balance a little bit more easily, obviously. And they've definitely been looking at that, and it's been a focus point. We spoke with the rating agencies, with the town only, like a couple of weeks ago, or it was about 3.5 weeks ago. With the town, we went through all the numbers. We went through everything related to potential impacts, anything current, and with Moody's. And, as the town came out with the AAA rating, there was it referenced a couple factors that could potentially lead to concern on their end, one of which was a significant deterioration of resident wealth metrics. Again, that's, income and those types of numbers, and a sustained contraction of the tax base. So of all the things that they could have put forth in the front page of the report, those are the two items that they mentioned. Now, of course, there's other concerns with fund balance, and if there's a reduction going forward there. Obviously, if there's a tremendous amount of increased debt, there's always a concern. But those are the two that they referenced in that particular report.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Mr. Walsh?
Good evening, Matt.
Hey, Jim.
Sorry to hear you were in an accident. Hope you're doing better.
I'm doing pretty well, thank you.
Glad you were able to join us this evening.
Thank you.
You might have been told or advised that today our joint pension boards changed their mortality charts to a municipal mortality chart, which then causes us to make a decision about whether to fund $1.8 million of additional liability for this current year and going forward. Were you advised of that?
Right. I've been sort of in the loop along the way, yes.
Okay. The first select woman said that if we didn't fund that, that was going to be a major problem. She said, "Been speaking to you, and can you explain to us what you see as being the stress points, whether if we fund it or whether we don't fund it this current year?"
Bottom line is, when you look at those items that get the most attention in the rating call, of course, I just mentioned the wealth metrics and the grand list. if you look at from financial measures, what items get a lot of consideration, obviously we talk fund balance, but we also talk about pensions, and we look at, or they look at, you know, the town's ability to maintain funding of the ADEC, and also obviously the funded ratio of the plan. So, you know, when you're looking at what are your options in terms of trying to keep taxes low, and you say, well, you know, well, I had this conversation all the time, and well, you always use some fund balance. You could potentially, you know, maybe not make the full pension payment, maybe not make the full OPEB payment. You know, there's not a ton of options that you have. But in terms of lower hanging fruit, you know, I using a considerable piece of fund balance, using a considerable portion of fund balance to help offset the budget increase, or not funding your ADEC, are not, I wouldn't really consider low hanging fruit. You know, I would say potentially OPEB funding doesn't get quite the same kind of headline and isn't really as high up on the list necessarily as pension. So, you know, if towns are looking to, you know, find some flexibility, oftentimes they say, well, if you have pension and OPEB, perhaps you lean towards the OPEB. It's not to say if you didn't fund the 1.8, you would be downgraded. It's not to say if you do fund the you know, the 1.8 that you will not ever have any credit concerns, but it's obviously a credit, you know, it's stronger from a credit perspective to having switched to the mortality tables, and also to have made this decision, it looks like anyways, to fund the pension, the difference. Now, if you weren't to fund it in 1 year, because this happens all the time, where assumptions change, let's say you take your investment return rate from 7.5 to 7, or 7 to 6.5. Obviously, whenever you make those changes, there's a large increase in your ADEC as a result. You're making a fiscally prudent choice, but you get hit with that higher ADEC as a result. Well, you know, it's not necessarily to say, well, if you do something like that and you don't make that 100% ADEC, that you're going to be downgraded. It's more, okay, you've made the change, there's a higher ADEC, now what's the plan to fund it? Is it a 2-year plan? Is it a 3-year plan? Communicating it to the rating agencies is the important thing there, to say, yes, we realize we're not making a full 100% ADEC, which of course they like you to do as a AAA, but we have a plan in place, and here's what we're going to do, and then we're going to follow through with it and continue to do that. So, you know, those are just some of my thoughts on the matter.
All right. I spoke to a classmate of mine who's pretty high up in municipal finance for Dun & Bradstreet, and just about municipal finance and about using fund balance and first, you know, retirement stuff. And her position was, in this day and age, that she believes that municipalities that don't use fund balance, but more address their finances with cuts, are going to be looked a lot more favorably than people who touch fund balance. Have you heard that same type of thought process out in your world?
Well, I don't think that that's out of the question. I think that, you know, if an issuer or if a community is able to make cuts to the budget and not use any fund balance and maintain the same level of fund balance through what could be the worst crisis we may ever deal with in our lifetime, hopefully, then of course if you put two together and one had to use fund balance and one didn't, of course the one that didn't use fund balance is probably going to be looked at more favorably. Now, considering that within the AAA category, there's a lot of factors. Well, within any category, there's a lot of factors that go into the rating. So, you know, it comes down to, well, being the strongest AAA and being an average AAA and being a slightly below average AAA is still a AAA. So, from a perspective of pricing in the market and marketing bonds and those kinds of things, you know, as long as that AAA is on there, the bonds are probably going to trade about the same. So while I agree that you're not using fund balance versus using fund balance would leave you in a slightly stronger position, there's a lot of different factors to consider when you all are putting your budgets together. and what your constituency is looking for and what your taxpayers are looking for. So, you know, from that perspective, it's a balancing act as far as, you know, what the taxpayers can stand and what, you know, you can do with fund balance and other options that you have to maintain the fund balance or to maintain the AAA rating and not, you know, put that in jeopardy going forward. So.
Okay. So from what you said earlier, you think we'd be in a better position if we were going to reduce something to reduce OPEB versus pension, correct?
I would say that
you would fully fund
from what I
ADAC.
hear,
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that that's what I would say. Yeah, it makes sense.
On your ratings calls, how often where's your OPEB level stand come up?
These things are credit fundamentals. They all come up on every call.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Now the difference is, for instance, when you're looking at fund balance and you're looking at grand list and you're looking at debt service to budget and all these types of things, there's certain criteria that the rating agencies have put forward very transparently that says it's, you know, if your fund balance is at this percentage, you get a score of X. If it's at this percentage, you get a score of Y, and so on and so forth. And that goes for debt to budget, like I said, the fund balance, it goes for income level ratios and things like that. There's really no specific data points that point directly to OPEB or pension, ironically. They don't say if your pension is a certain percentage funded or you're making your 100% ADEC that you automatically get graded at a certain level. So they always come up in the conversation because that's part of credit fundamentals. But there's a lot of nuances within OPEB and pension that come up that aren't really as black and white as certain things like a fund balance. They look at pension liability to revenues, pension liability to grand list, OPEB to grand list. No one ever manages to that number. Like, it's not a thing that say, well, we don't want to have more than 5%, you know, whatever. It just doesn't happen. The point is, you know, you want to try and make your ADEC, you know, with both if you can, but more towns make 100% funding on the pension than they do the OPEB. And you want to get that funded ratio as high as you can to close to 100 if you can possibly do it. Now, market changes, assets are going to be down. I think everyone's pension is going to probably take some kind of a hit in the next couple of years. There's smoothing. There's all these different things that will happen with the actuaries that will help to soften that blow. But I think you're going to see some, you know, there's going to be a lot of change and volatility there. And hopefully those funds and things don't go down too low that they have to, make some kind of a rating adjustment.
Do you have those numbers in regards to your fund balance levels and what kind of score you get based on what levels of fund balance you have?
Well, S&P, for instance, gives you full credit, and I say full credit by the top score for anything. If it's over 15%, the next level is 8 to 15, and then it's like 4 to 8, and it goes down from there. But
okay.
You're at, say, 10 or 11. You're right in the middle of that.
Okay.
The problem will become, if I might just give you the problem would come for, I'm just saying for a town, it could be Fairfield or someone else. Let's say you're at 9.5% fund balance, and now you're going into this budget and you have to drop it down, and now it goes to 7.5 fund balance. At the same time, your grand list contracts a bit, and there's a drop in your pension. You're not hitting the ADEC. You get all these little nicks along the different criteria points, and now all of a sudden you have rating pressure. That's kind of how it works. You're not adhering to a policy, and then you get hit on the management side. That's sort of how it tends to go when we see these rating pressures, unless it's something super dramatic, like we had 10% fund balance, now we have 3. And then it's like, well, what position are they going to be? And you're going to probably get downgraded in that case.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I appreciate your assistance.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Walsh. And thank you, Matt. Just for the record, Matt is the town's financial advisor, outside financial advisor. Any other questions for Mr. Sparndown? Mr. Mottola, did you have a question? Mr. Mottola?
I'm having trouble hearing everybody. I don't know about the rest of you. The last
Can you guys hear
5
me?
minutes I heard nothing. Can you guys,
Can you hear me?
everyone sound good or bad?
Good.
Sheila's was bad. I can't hear
Sheila's
you.
muted.
You're
Sheila's
mute.
muted.
No problem hearing you. I like Jim's screen type.
Okay. I just want to remind everyone that when you speak, just identify yourself so the public knows who you are. Okay, thank you for that. And Mr. Mottola, can you hear me okay? Chris, Mr. DeWitt, or Mr. Walsh, can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, no problem. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Sprindell? Seeing none, Matt, can you just not leave us yet until we're finished voting for pension and for retirement benefits? And
Absolutely.
thank you. And we have Stefan Jakurta here with us tonight from H&H. Thank you for being here, Mr. Jakurta. And before we move on to voting, are there any questions for Mr. Jakurta for H&H, of H&H? Mr. Walsh.
Good evening, Mr. Chikerta. So you obviously heard of the now formal vote by the Joint Pension Fund today, correct?
Mr. Jakurta, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We can hear you now.
I heard it sounded like they were gonna do a formal vote to adopt the new mortality tables that we had been talking about in our previous meetings.
Yeah, you didn't hear that they voted for it?
No, because I was understanding that it was going to happen after 4 o'clock or so.
They were going to vote after 4 o'clock. But whoever told you that it was going to pass like that is, I guess, a Swami, because it did pass.
It did? Okay.
Oh, overwhelmingly.
I'm
Our
back.
selectwoman voted for it as well.
Okay.
You guys hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you, John.
All right, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Am I allowed to ask a question still, or did you move on to something else?
Okay. Mr. Mottola, I'll go back to you. Go ahead and ask your question.
It's all right. I'm okay.
No, go ahead, ask your question. It's okay.
I was just and I understand what you were saying, and then I lost you for a while there. But so it sounds like everything's really a balancing act. We have a general fund balance policy that talks about a lot of the things you already discussed. But let's assume, for argument's sake, that after the end of this current fiscal year, we have a significant surplus. And what we do a lot of times is we dump all of that money into our fund balance. Would there be anything, and I think I know what your answer is going to be, but if we take money that we thought we were going to designate to OPEB to help pay for the pension costs, is there anything unwise about taking some of our surplus and dumping it into OPEB at the end of the fiscal year and then putting some in fund balance, kind of like a balancing situation? Or would you recommend that whenever we have a surplus, we should dump it into fund balance?
When you say fund balance, you mean the balance of the pension fund?
I'm talking about our fund balance that the town has.
Oh, I guess that's how you guys want to utilize your capital. What makes the most sense for you? It sounded like what Matt was saying, to have a positive fund balance is a good thing when you guys go out for bonding. But if there is a surplus, it's always a good thing to fund your pension plan or your OPEB plans. I think that's a very good thing, especially as you try to increase that funding ratio.
All right, but that's all I had, thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mottola. Going back to you, Mr. Walsh.
Mr. Chair, I just want to confirm that now that they formally have made the change, it's a $1.8 million increase, correct? That your firm actuarially has determined?
That is correct. That is correct.
$1.8 million exactly? Or is it?
That's rounded to the 100,000, obviously.
Okay.
But yes, that's that ballpark. I could tell you, give me a sec, I'll pull up the exact number. I can. The exact number looks like 11,940,588. Did you get that, Mr. Walsh?
11,948.
No,
How much?
11,940,588.
588. Okay. Yep. Thank you. Okay. And does that impact OPEB at all?
That is strictly pensions only.
Okay. That determination will not impact any of the OPEB things that we're talking, the numbers that you've calculated, correct, on the actuarial side?
Correct.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Chakurta, I've just asked you the same thing. We're going to be taking votes on the retiree benefits, and I'd just like you to stay on until we are complete.
Okay, not a problem.
All right, thank you. So for the board and the public, we're going to page 270, retiree benefits. And we have it, as you just heard, multiple meetings on the mortality rate table and how that affects the funds needed to cover ADAC. So the pension board did vote today on a new table that affects and increases the ADAC necessary to cover the recommendation that the town should fund on an annual basis. And we as a board have always made it a point to fully fund the ADAC. And even with this new table that was voted on, our intent, I should say my intent, and see how the board votes, is to fully fund the ADAC for the pension. So for that, let's move on. Let's go to line item 52310, retirement contributions to the town. And I'm going to make a motion that the current retirement contribution to the town, which is, and it's been updated, $2,378,292, that we increase that number by $1,143,919, making the Board of Finance recommended budget $3,522,211. The reason? Accepting the ADAC based on the new mortality table. Can I have a second?
I'll second, Mr. Chairman. This is Jack Testani.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Testani, and I'll call on the second, but Mr. Testani seconds. Any further comments? Seeing no comments, I'm seeing a half a hand raised up. Ms. Charlton.
I apologize. Can you just repeat the two numbers? I thought you said 2.3 plus 1.8 for a total of 3.5, which...
Okay, it's 2.378, 2378292.
Yep.
Okay, and we're going to increase that number by 1143919.
1143. Got it. 919. I think you said 1843. 1143919. Right. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any further, Mr. Mottola?
I was just going to say, Mr. Brown, we got a document emailed to us like probably around 3:30, 4 o'clock, and it has all those figures. That's the document I'm talking about. You guys see what we're talking about? I think Linda Gardner sent it out.
Yes.
Okay, that's what we're referring to here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Mr. Bateson?
Aye.
Okay, it is unanimous. We go to the next slide, 52311, Police and Fire Retirement Contribution. Make a motion that the current number, $5,306,746, is to increase that number by $916,624, making the Board of Finance recommended budget to $6,223,370. The reason, accepting the AID Act based on the new mortality rate. Can I have a second? Seconded by Ms. Charlton. Any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, it is unanimous. Now, if you can go to page 273. And we're gonna go to the Board of Ed pension, the general fund, Board of Ed pension, 8010 and 58900. I'm gonna make a motion that we take the current number of $2,235,000 and reduce that number by $325,578, making the Board of Finance recommended budget of $1,909,422. The reason, accepting the AID Act based on the new mortality rate. I need a second. Seconded by Mr. Walsh. And any comments? And let me just ask a question. Mr. Jakurta, as you heard, Ms. Gardner sent us a table. And the question that I have, and I know a few others have, is as we increase the pension, the retirement benefits for the pension, how does the Board of Ed actually go down $325,578?
The only thing I can think of is that there's a different change in what the initial budget number was versus the new mortality table. So I'm not sure what the preliminary number was that they used. I'm thinking that number, as I mentioned to Linda, was based off of the 18 valuation, and that was a budget number we provided back in October to the predecessor, to Bob and his group at that time. And then when we get the new data, which is the budget we're doing now, we get updated data and we true that up. So that tells me that the population was a little bit different than the initial valuation that the budget was set off of.
Okay, I'm going to ask for follow-up questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to make, this is accurate because we're going to adjust. I'm going to just make sure that this is accurate because we're going to adjust the Board of Ed budget by this amount based on, this information.
Yep, that was split based on the population that we were provided when we did the 7/119 valuation, and with the changes and what it was. I think some people, it's the salaries. I don't remember all the fine-tuned details, but it happened to do with the population, that the shift that occurred over from 18 to 19.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mottola.
So if we didn't adopt the new mortality table, would the Board of Ed number, which was $2,235,000, would that have gone down anyway after you did your, whatever you just said, your adjustments?
That That should have. I had not split before the mortality tables. I did not split that number out to them yet. Before, I did the new mortality tables, but I did not do it before those mortality tables were adopted. So I don't know what that drop was from the budget numbers that we gave them back in October of 19. I can certainly do that calculation and provide that tomorrow.
Now, I guess that's fine, but you're certain that this is the right number, the one we're about to vote on tonight?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions on this item? Okay, seeing none. Put this motion up for a vote. Ms. Charlton. Good thing I looked up.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Lori Charlton. I just want to quickly follow up on Mr. Mottola's comment. Would we have missed this if we had not changed the mortality table? I guess I'm wondering about the process that we use in the budget. I guess I don't even know who I'm asking this to, but it just strikes me that the process used to allocate the liability between the Board of Ed and the town, I'm hearing that there was an error in it, and that we kind of discovered that when we went to apply the numbers for this new mortality table.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they were never asked for another number that between that, because we always just give them a number for the town, and then sometimes they ask us to split it out between the town and the Board of Ed, and for the purposes you're going through right now.
Okay, and just to clarify for everyone, the reason the Board of Ed is going down, it's not that there's a difference in how this was applied, it's just a function of how the number was originally budgeted for the Board of Ed, or how the total was originally allocated between the two. And this is fixing that, and it likely would have had to be fixed anyway, but we just didn't pick it up until we looked at these mortality tables again.
That sounds right.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Just, I guess, a note to ourselves from a process perspective going forward.
No, it gives me a little information as well, making sure that they have that number, even if they don't ask for that.
Yeah.
I'll try to put that to them.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Charlton. I want to make sure that everyone can hear me okay, because I just got knocked off for a couple seconds. Okay. Any further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of this motion, please say aye.
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 Opposed? It is unanimous. Okay, staying on page 270, we're going to go to OPEB. We're going to go to OPEB for town retirees and police and fire retirees. So when we get there, my motion will be to reduce these line items combined by $3.8 million. But please note that we're still going to fund OPEB by over $5.5 million. Now, as far as this account, I've spoken to members of the pension board today, and we talked about OPEB and not fully funding OPEB for the fiscal year 2021. And they are not uncomfortable. These are words that we used, all right, in our conversation. Not uncomfortable. They're not overly concerned or overly worried. And they're not alarmed about the impact of not fully funding OPEB this year. You know, as we discussed, we have been turbo paying this fund since 2009. And we're in the top 5, 10% in Connecticut as far as the funding goes. So it's a healthy funded trust. We are paying expenses as we go. We put money into the trust, and there has been no reductions to the fund. So there's no medical costs coming from the fund currently. And it's possible, from what I'm hearing, and it came up in our meeting with H&H, and Stefan, I'm glad you're here because you can correct me if this is not correct. But we are going to get some relief through the Affordable Care Act, through a federal ruling in regards to the Cadillac tax that is being revoked, and that helps us out, and that's a decent movement in our favor. No, we're not talking thousands of dollars, we're talking up to 7 figures. So, Mr. Jakarta, just on that one point, can you confirm that?
There was a savings in the preliminary. I looked at the numbers, and overall, you know, it gets washed out or eaten up based on the change to the mortality table. So the impact on the OPEB for the new mortality table is not 1.8 million. It's only I believe it was 150,000, 200,000. So there would be a slight increase.
Okay, I could barely hear myself, but is that a positive?
Yes, the repeal is a positive, but it tends to be overall when you incorporate the new mortality tables, it becomes a slight negative. You hear that?
Okay. Okay. So before we vote, I'm having some audio problems right now, everybody. So before we vote, I want to take a sense of the body, okay, about not funding OPEB, and it's this. If we have a surplus at the end of the year, at the end of this year, fiscal year 2020, we will commit to utilize that surplus to cover part of the reduction in OPEB. So I'll make that sense. I'll put that motion on the table. Can I have a second by Mr. DeWitt? And all those in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, opposed? So that is unanimous, okay? Any further questions on the dialogue for OPEB?
Just that you said that we're not funding OPEB. You just mean the reduction that we made to OPEB, I think was what we agreed to.
Correct, right.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just gonna get on another computer here because I'm having trouble hearing from this one. All right, so I'm gonna make a motion on 52105, OPEB expense for the town retirees, that we reduce the contribution of the current $4,046,875 by $1,634,000 to adjust that number to $2,412,875. Can I have a second? Second by Mr. Walsh. Are there any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, going to police and fire expense, 52110. I'll make a motion to reduce the contribution of the current number of $5,284,000 by $2,166,000 to an adjusted number of $3,118,000. Can I have a second? Second by Mr. DeWitt. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Thank you very much. So that is it for now for retiree benefits. And
Brown, we can see Mr. Brown, we can see your front and your back now. This
I
is
know,
great.
because I'm about to get on another
love it.
computer if this
I
one
love
doesn't
it.
work.
We get all views of you.
Oh, yeah. That's an ugly sight, I realize. Sorry about that.
That's better.
That's a nice office.
I have to leave my options open because I'm having trouble, of course, on the night we vote with this, my laptop. Okay.
We hear you good.
Okay, let's go to page 102. We're going to go to contingency.
102, right?
Page 102. Okay, 58010. For fiscal year 21, that currently stands at $1,038,450. So I'm going to make a motion that we reduce contingency, $738,450, which will bring it to normal contingency of $300,000. Can I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Walsh. Any comments? No comments. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? That stands. Before we move on, I just want to let Matt and Stefan go. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Have a good night, guys.
Good night, thank you.
Thank you.
So, before we move to revenue, and later we'll come back to contribution to surplus, I just think it's important to note that we're fully funding the pension. We have not done so with OPEB. Fund balance will not be, I was told I have to say it's unanimous vote before I move on, okay? So it's a unanimous vote on contingency. So we have not done so with OPEB, and so we need to consider the cliff that this is going to cause next year, right? We're going to develop multiple cliffs as we move into 2021, and we're going to have to adjust for them and consider the impact as we move through this budget season and into the fiscal year. You know, it's good that we've had these funds this year because of this difficult time. You know, we spent a decade building them up. It's against common practice not to fund completely, but it's absolutely warranted given the plight of the taxpayers at the present time. So now we're going to move on to revenue, and I'm going to ask you to go to attachment A, which was sent over by the administration, by Linda Gardner, this afternoon. And this attachment covers the COVID adjustments as recommended by the department heads since the vote happened with the Board of Selectmen. Okay, so I just want to make sure the board has this document that I'm showing. Shows all the revenue. So it shows the Board of Selectmen budget, the suggested Board of Finance adjustments, and what the Board of Finance budget would look like if we were to agree with these adjustments. And so we'll take attachment A. Sorry?
It starts off with building the first one, right?
It starts off with building permits and then penalties and then ends with TPZ.
Thank you.
Okay. So instead of going through the book on these particular revenue lines, and we'll go to the book for the rest, my question is, are there any adjustments that people, that our members, our board members would like to make to this document? And if we have adjustments, we'll vote on those adjustments. And if it passes, they'll be there for the record. And then we'll vote on the amended attachment A. So are there any, and we've seen this document before. We've gone through it multiple times throughout our budget process. And our department heads have explained them as well. So are there any questions, comments, or motions to this attachment? Mr. Walsh.
Numbers, the yellow column, the Board of Finance adjustments are just recommendations to the Board of Finance from the administration, correct?
They are recommendations. That's why we need to vote on them.
Or not vote on them. We don't have to change.
Or not vote on them. That's
Yeah.
right.
Great, okay, thank you for the clarification.
Are there any amendments, any questions, any adjustments? If not, what I'm going to do is vote on this document, and then this document will stand as recommended by the administration. Mr. Walsh.
I don't want to accept the changes in anything to do with building. I thought Mr. Conley made a strong case before us after speaking with our large developers and what he saw coming, that I don't see any need to adjust it. I know he made a recommendation the last night that we go to a 3-year average. I don't want to take that. Building in this town is cooking. Fairfield U has told him that all their large projects, which were paid for by donors, not with their budgeted capital numbers, and the same thing for Sacred Heart University and some other large developers is still going to continue. So therefore, I want to take, and he's sailing through his number. He is so high above his numbers for this year, it's crazy. So I want to take his original number, and I don't want to take that suggested Board of Finance adjustment recommendation.
Okay, so Mr. Walsh, just to clarify, that's 42112 building permits of $273,724.
Yeah.
Would you include 42203 or 42374, or are you leaving them alone?
All three of them I want to be at their original levels.
Okay. Do I have a second? Mr. Testani?
I want to second Mr. Walsh's motion.
Okay, are there comments? Okay, Ms. Marmion?
Thanks. I respect what Mr. Connolly has to say. I'm going to respectfully disagree with Mr. Walsh and vote against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Any other comments? Of course, okay, seeing none, we'll put this to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Walsh, Mr. Testani, Mr. DeWitt, Ms. LeClaire, Mr. Brown. All those opposed? And Mr. Bateson. All those opposed? Ms. Charlton, Mr. Mottola, and Ms. Marmion. Motion carries 6-3. Any other comments, motions for this document? Mr. DeWitt.
The Board of Selectmen had removed, make sure I get the right line item. It's line number 42 in the sheet, and it's budget or object 42360, fire marshal fees. The Board of Selectmen, based on past experience, raised the fire marshal fees from 400,000 to 500,000. There's a recommendation in this document to lower that back to the 400,000. I would like to delete that recommendation and return it to the Board of Selectmen adjusted number of $500,000.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Testani. Any further comments? Seeing no further comments, we'll put this item for a vote. All those in favor? Mr. Walsh, Mr. Testani, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Bateson, Ms. LeClaire, Mr. Brown. All those opposed? Ms. Charlton, Mr. Mottola, and Ms. Marmion. So that motion carries 6-3. Any other motions to put forth? Questions or comments on this document, attachment A? Okay, seeing none. I'm going to put a motion on the table to adopt attachment A as adjusted. Can I have a second? Seconded by Ms. Leclerc. Any comments? Okay, all those in favor of attachment A as adjusted? Mr. Walsh, Mr. Testani, Mr. DeWitt, Ms. Leclerc, Ms.
Marmion,
Mr. Bateson? All those opposed? Mr. Mottola, Ms. Charlton, and Ms. Marmion. Okay, so this attachment passes 6-3. And so now we have the Board of Finance adjusted revenues in attachment A approved. Let's stay with revenues. Page 15. Are there any further comments, questions on revenue?
Well,
Seeing none. Mr. Walsh.
just a general comment. I think we all agree we don't know really where this revenue is going and where this whole tax collection rate's going. And we heard the arguments by, or the comments made by Mr. Bremer. But, you know, it's hard to choose something different when we don't have information. So, you know, I understand that they had to make certain choices, but, and I'm also concerned about where the state's going with, you know, with not having any money, because they've closed down businesses in the state. And we're just going to have to, you know, accept those numbers because we keep hearing we're going to get all that money. I just don't know where all the money's coming from. So we're going to have to backstop that against the fund balance, I guess, is what we're going to have to do. So I think we just have to acknowledge that. Come on.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any further comment on revenue? Okay, so then we will vote on revenue as stated with the adjustments by that document. This is non-tax revenue. All those in favor? Mr. Walsh, Mr. Testani, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Mottola, Ms. Charlton, Ms. Leclerc, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Bateson, and Mr. Brown. Okay, so non-tax revenue. Has been approved. Next we go to the Board of Ed. Okay, so the Board of Ed currently stands at $187,358,852 at a 3.13% budget. Can I have a motion to put this before us, the Board of Ed budget? Ms. Charlton, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. So this budget is now before us. Any comments? Mr. Walsh.
To continue on our conversation, I think we've all come to the understanding that, and I'd like to thank the Board of Ed and Mr. Cummings for explaining that the current numbers they're looking at for the end of this current fiscal year that we're sitting in right now, there's going to be approximately $3.3 million worth of savings. And we talked about establishing a non-lapsing account. Mr. Cummings presented a document recently where he explained that there was going to be, in this upcoming year, some additional anticipated expenses related to COVID-19 and distance learning. Document that kind of looks like this. And he made a pretty compelling case for why he would need numbers that were not in his current upcoming budget that we're kind of looking at and getting ready to vote on. Those numbers totaled a little bit more than $1.8 million, leaving approximately $1.5 million. And we discussed the last meeting about potentially entering into a non-lapsing account that wherein we would put the $1.8 million to cover those Board of Education anticipated additional expenses, and to also put in there the remaining balance of 1.5, just specifically that 1.5 to be used for operational costs for the fiscal year 21 budget that we're considering. And while that has not been written, I would try to like to get a sense of the body that that's what we want to do. I will point out for anybody from the public that's listening quickly that Mr. Cummings and the Board of Education's list of costs for the $1.8 million of COVID-related expenses includes quickly computers for grades 3 to 5, which is $254,000, elementary online reading books, $38,500, program applications and software, $44,000 and change, an extended school year, $675,000, elementary school for summer school for regular education students, $6,125, high school summer school regular ed, $25,000, extended school day regular education, elementary, amount of $132,000, extended school day special ed, $647,500, and then masks for the entire school population, 12,000 masks at $36,000. Now, all of those costs, he explained, could change over time because they don't know whether they're going to be able to have in-school summer programs and things like that. So maybe distance learning, there could be further savings on that, but we need to put a number in there. So that's why we decided to move forward with that. We are going to accomplish this with a non-lapsing account, of which we are going to set up a memorandum of understanding similar to some of those terms that we spoke generally about. That's going to take probably another 30 days to work on, and I think it is, I would like to say in our sense of the body that it will be negotiated with the Board of Education, Mr. Cummings' office, and Central Administration, maybe one or two representatives. Mr. Brown, I'll leave that up to you, from our board and the town attorney. So, but I want to give them confidence in regards to those funds and our intent to put those funds into a non-lapsing account. And I've had discussions with Mr. Cummings about doing so, and about the fact that it was just too late to get all the legalities and have that before us this evening. Mr. Cummings requested that maybe we should go to the 2% that the statute allows us to go to. I said we'd have to discuss that. So that's going to be open for discussion, but we all seem to be working well together on wanting to get this all done. But in order for the Board of Education and our board, the town, to understand, I think we need to do a sense of the body that we will get this accomplished within the next 30 days. So I'm making that sense of the body motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Can I have a second for the sense of the body, just for discussion? Mr. Mottola? Okay, so the sense of the body motion is for us. And Mr. Mottola, do you have a comment?
I did. I agree with what Mr. Walsh has said. I think the Board of Ed, by the end of the fiscal year, right now is estimated to have about $3.3 million. I would hope that this board, if that goes over that amount, the most that can be put into this non-lapsing account is $3.6 million under the statute. And I would ask that that if that money is there, that we fund the full amount, and get a sense of the body that there's a commitment from this Board of Finance that we would set up an account for $3.6 million if obviously the money is there in order for us to do that. The statute says that those types of monies can be used for educational purposes. I said about a week or so ago, this is money that was already budgeted for the Board of Education to be used for educational purposes. And really the only reason why there's a surplus is because the board had to shut down, school had to close this year. So I would add that to our sense of the body, I guess, motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lori Charlton. I want to agree with what Mr. Mottola said and what Mr. Walsh said. I think there's generally broad agreement. I want everybody to recall that when Mr. Cummings presented the list of potential expenses to provide additional services for students next year, that that list was, we don't know what that's going to be, but he also emphasized that it wasn't necessarily complete because there were just some things that could not be estimated at that point. Things like, potentially, deep cleaning of the schools on a more regular basis, or physical barriers that would need to be constructed to support physical distancing measures. So I think we're just dealing with so many uncertainties that $3.6 million, I would suggest we not try to parse it down so finely and just, give the board the flexibility, the Board of Education, the flexibility of the full amount to the extent it's available, with the appropriate language in the MOU, with the appropriate level of accountability and reporting that gives the public and this board the confidence that, the money will be used in the manner in which we all believe it's intended. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris DeWitt, just a quick clarification. Mr. Mottola referenced a $3.6 million number. The actual figure is, it's 2% of the total budget. So that number might be 2.6 mathematically. I just want to be clear, if anything happens to the, whatever adjustments made to the budget, the actual amount is actually 2% of whatever the budget is. Right. That 3.6 is that number can change. I am generally in agreement with Mr. Mottola. I do 100% want to make sure that whatever the number is in that non-lapsing account, it does cover all of our COVID expenses for 100% and anything above and beyond. I'm not real interested in going too much above that number and, funding other stuff next year. And we've had that discussion multiple times, doesn't need to be belabored, but I am in support of that number, absolutely 100% funding all of our COVID related expenses and then, other issues based on what we're dealing with right now. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Walsh?
I hear what Mr. Mottola is saying, but all of this is kind of this is the, devil's in the details. And I think that we're going to have to start drafting stuff because, we could find out that we get $1 million or $2 million from the federal government towards our COVID expenses. And the Board of Ed's shouldn't be able to keep that plus what we're putting aside. So I'm willing to work on trying to get something done. I don't think we're going to be able to agree to it. I would be, I want COVID expenses paid, but I don't also want this to go towards new programming, things that are not in the budget. So I think that we're going to have to work through this. And then I think this body's going to have a special meeting sometime in the next 30 days to sit down with this and go through it. But this is going to have to be a kind of a give and take, working out these details and getting exactly what we're talking about and legal language down in this MOU so everyone can understand it. So I'm not against it if there's extra expenses, but if there's savings, I just don't want to make sure, there's going to have to be some level of trust on this thing, but on the other hand, you know, we do have to write it up so we all understand what we're talking about. And I don't think we're going to be able to do that tonight, but I wanted to give the BOE some sense of security that this was our plan to do, and everybody in this meeting are members of our body, some type of sense of the emotion that this is what we plan on doing in the next 30 days.
Mr. Mottola? Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Mottola?
Thank you, John Mottola. Mr. Walsh, I don't disagree with you. I would be upset if we set up this account and it was used to pay for a new program that we didn't even know about. I get it. I think part of this should be used to help offset what's going on from a budgetary standpoint moving forward, but that's not to create new programs. I get all that. And I think we're all really on the same page. You know, I'm obviously willing to have a meeting in the next 30 days to discuss this further. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Any further comments? Okay, so let's go back to Mr. Walsh's sense of the body. Is there any further comments on Mr. Walsh's sense of the body? It was seconded by
Me.
Who was it? Seconded by Mr. DeWitt, was it? Or Mr. Mottola? Seconded by Mr. Mottola.
No, Mr. DeWitt.
Give it to
Okay.
John.
Ms.
John,
Marmion. Ms. Marmion.
Hi, can we just clarify the wording of the sense of the body? I just want to know more specifically. Could Mr. Walsh repeat that, the language that will be used?
Yes, we will do, it's our sense of a body that we would like trying to think of the name of the account,
Non-lapsing account.
Non-lapsing account, of which we plan on putting in $3.3 million of savings that the Board of Ed has identified, but will not be finalized until their school year is completed. Of which $1.8 million will be used towards COVID-19 related additional expenses that have since been identified but not included in their fiscal year 21 budget period. That an additional $1.5 million of those funds will be specifically used for operational costs identified in their fiscal year 21 budget period. And that the Central Administration, Board of Education, our board, and the town attorney will be negotiating and executing in the next 30 days a memorandum of understanding that will lay out the details on how the two parties will manage this account.
Okay. Ms. Marmion?
I just want to be clear, for the record, I think part of the thought is that we would also have terms in here about some type of permanent portion of this, where future amounts after COVID-19 crisis is over, excess funds from the Board of Ed could go into there to pay for emergency repairs. So that's going to have to be part of this, and we will have to discuss that. But that'll have to be negotiated. Personally, I don't believe that it should always stay at 2% of their budget, because it would mean that there would always be $3 million. There potentially could be $3 million just sitting in an account being unused for emergency repairs, which I think is personally is too high. And most other MOUs that I've looked at through the state that exist seem to cap it around $500,000. And as I stated, our district's sometimes bigger than some of those districts, so maybe we should look at something slightly higher, but not $3 million, 3.6.
So, Mr. Sheila Marmion, so that was Mr. Walsh kind of beat me to it. I was going to reference Mr. Mottola mentioning the state statute that said that this account could be 2% of the total budget. And I do feel like we can have language. I know we're not going to work out the exact language. This is a sense of the body, but there should be something up to 2% of the total budget from a sense of the body. I just want to kind of put that out there.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Marmy. Any further comments? Mr. Mottola?
I think just to be clear in Mr. Walsh's motion, since the body, we're not necessarily limiting ourselves to those figures, that there could be a situation where we would maybe add some more if we felt it was necessary. I guess that's all. And I think, I'm not saying we would do that, but that we're given that option, that's all. Up to what the statutory amount is, what the statute authorizes us to do. That's all. And I see everyone shaking their head.
Yeah, I think we're pretty close on this. We're gonna develop this account. We'll transfer funds into it. We'll get an MOU, and we'll get the appropriate language. Okay. Any further comments on Mr. Walsh's sense of the body motion? If seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Walsh, Mr. Testani, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Mottola, Ms. Charlton, Ms. Leclerc, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Bateson?
Aye.
Okay, Mr. Brown, so we're unanimous there. Mr. Walsh, turning it back over to you on the Board of Ed budget.
All right, now that we've established that, I would like to make a reduction to the Board of Education, but I want to explain the numbers first, and then I'll get there. So we know that $1.5 million, based on our sense of the body, is our intent to roll over into fiscal year 21 for the Board of Education. So that 1.5 is going to be part of the reduction. Another part of the reduction is we just learned over this weekend that there has been a reduction in the bus contract because of the current year bus contract of $468,000 that we've already paid them, but that they don't want to return. And the agreement is that they'll apply it as a credit towards the fiscal year 21 bus contract. So that is a direct savings for fiscal year 21 that is not currently in their budget. So I'm going to add that to the reduction. And lastly, we already spoke about it a little earlier tonight because of the actions by the Joint Pension Board, their mortality tables, and in identifying some change in numbers, there's a savings in the amount that the Board of Education in their budget has to pay towards pensions to the amount of $325,578,000. That's a direct savings. So when you add those three figures up, the 1.5 million, the 468,000 bus savings, and the 325,578 in savings for the pension, that equals $2,293,578 worth of savings. And I am making a motion to reduce the Board of Education's budget that was passed on to us. Well, it was the first selectman's budget, and then the Board of Selectmen agreed with her by $2,293,578. I will say that this will really not have any impact on their budget. I mean, Mr. Cummings spoke about that shortly before this meeting because I wanted to fully fill him in on what my reduction was going to be, and he understood that, and he used the word, yes, this will have no impact on us. So that's my motion.
May I have a second, please? Seconded by Ms. Charlton. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
We offer pay by phone service.
Mr. Testani?
Aye, sir.
Okay. It's unanimous. Okay, that takes care of the Board of Ed budget. Well, let's go back to page 46. And we're gonna go through this budget now in order. We'll start with the First Select Woman's Office, page 45, page 46. Comments, questions, motions for this budget?
Hold on, Mr.
Mr. Walsh?
I am going to be making a series of cuts, and I just wanted to just explain it now, because they apply to every department with certain increases. Because of the difficult year we're in, I think that we need to hold the line on certain costs for every department in town. So, and those departments are as follows. I believe this is anything a normal business would do who's having economic problems. Office supplies, education and memberships, and travel and meetings. So I've gone through the entire budget, and I plan on making reductions in those areas to 2020 levels, just no increases past those levels, and holding the line on those costs. I think, not doing it, I think is bad optics. So this is all budgets, but this is the first one we have to deal with. So I'm making a motion to reduce line 56110, office supplies by $1,000, and lines 58120, travel and meetings by $2,000. But this will be a consistent theme. I just wanted to put it out there for our board.
Can I have a second on the motion? Seconded by Ms. Marmion. Any comments? Okay. It's going to be consistent throughout, so it is something we'll be seeing for the rest of the night. Okay.
I'm only, just so you know, Mr. Brown, I'm only going to bring it up where there's increases. So some departments might have nothing. No, they were the same numbers consistently through a lot of departments, but I'm only going to bring it up where there's an increase in one of those three areas.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Ms. Marmion, you had a comment?
Yeah, so Mr. Walsh, it's not a percentage, it's just going back to the 2020 budget for those increases. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
thank you.
To hold the line on those costs.
Thank you.
Ms. Marmion, any further comments? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous. Any other comments, questions on the First Select Woman's budget? Okay, moving forward to the Town Clerk, page 4849. Comments, questions on this budget? Mr. Walsh.
While there's none of those three categories that did increase, I'm not making a motion to reduce there. I am making a motion to reduce line 56100, printing, binding, and photography by $10,000, bringing it to $70,000. I did call the town clerks. I've called a number of the town departments, and I specifically spoke to Betsy Brown about this and whether there's anything in her area she could find to save, because I was trying to ask all the town departments whether there was anything to save. And she was good enough to come back with this $10,000 and said she could live without it. She says she's getting a lot more electronic filings, so it does save her some money. but she thought she could live with it, and I'd just like to, personally thank Betsy for actually working with me on that, and trying to save the town some money.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Do I have a second? Second by Ms. Leclerc. Any comments? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous. Any other motion for the town clerk's budget? Seeing none, moving on to FairTV. Questions, comments for FairTV's budget? Seeing none, moving on to administrative services. Questions? Seeing none, moving on to register of voters. Mr. Walsh.
And continuing the reductions I mentioned earlier in those three departments, I'd like to make a motion to reduce the register of voters line 58120 travels and meetings by $300 to restore to the 2000 funding level.
I have a second. Second by Ms. Marmion. Comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous. Any further motions for the register of voters? And moving on, zoning board of appeals, page 61. Seeing nothing there. Town planning and zoning, page 62, 63. Seeing nothing there. Probate court, page 65. Seeing nothing. Historic District Commission, page 68, 69. Seeing nothing. Conservation. Page 71, 72. Okay, seeing none, moving on to the infamous Shellfish Commission budget. Mr. DeWitt?
Just kidding.
Has nothing there. Legal services, page 78, 79. Seeing nothing, moving on.
That budget is at how much money, legal?
That is at $588,825.
That is
Actually, that budget was reduced by the Board of Selectmen by $3,825.
And Mr. Baldwin stated that he did not add in fees, legal fees, for the upcoming reassessment. Isn't that correct?
That is
$150,000.
Yes.
Which he admitted, I think, was a rookie mistake. And, I think it was an honest answer. And I think that we should consider, and they did supply us money, numbers to show that in years of assessment that they had spent close to $150,000 a year. And my concern is that we don't have enough in there to cover the assessment. Did anybody else have that same concern?
So,
No?
I did not. This is Jim Brown, Mr. Walsh. So he has a budget. It's $150,000 increase from fiscal year 20, and so that will not cover the additional expenses.
Okay, I guess that'll pretty much cover it. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
We can move forward.
Okay, moving on from legal, miscellaneous contingencies. Employee benefits. Now, Ms. Leclerc.
Make an adjustment to line 52-100, health self-insurance. It's a proposed reduction of $409,262. Oh, can you hear?
Yes.
Okay. So it was a proposed reduction by administration. So I'd like to make a motion to reduce the budget by that amount. And the revised amount.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Leclerc. So we're going to reduce this 52100 by $409,262.
Yes.
I have a second. Second by Mr. Mottola. Questions, comments? Mr. Mottola.
Hey, I just want to be sure what Ms. Leclerc said. So that was recommended by the administration?
That is correct.
Okay. I missed that for some reason. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, all those in favor?
Yeah. What I didn't say, it was based on the Aon adjustments for March.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, it is unanimous. Moving on to human resources, page 86, 87, 88, 89. Questions, comments on this budget? Ms. Leclerc.
I'd like to make a reduction to this budget for line 58,920. It's for risk management fund changes. I'd like to propose a reduction of $200,000 to set the budget at $700,000 based on a recommendation from town administration.
I have a second. Seconded by Mr. Mottola. Comments, questions? Okay, so this budget would stand at $700,000, this line item. Ms. Charlton.
I apologize. I thought when we had the discussion that we concluded, that Mr. Baldwin concluded that 600,000 was the number he was comfortable with?
There was a conversation, Mr. Mottola?
I believe that's right, because I think we got, the number we came down to was 560,250, and then Mr. Baldwin said, let's 600,000 I'd be more comfortable with. I remember that discussion. That's my recollection, at least.
Yep.
Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, that was my recollection. I think he had a range in there that goes as low as 560 to 250, but as high as 747,006. And I think Ms. Charlton questioned him whether 600,000 would be a better number. So I was wondering whether Ms. Leclerc would entertain an amendment to reduce it to 300,000 instead of the 200,000.
So before she does that,
yeah.
Before she does that, I'll go to Mr. DeWitt. Mr. DeWitt.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris DeWitt. I had a conversation with Ms. Gardner today about this line item. I can see Ms. Gardner's hand anyway, and there it is. And she recommended we not go above the $200,000 cut. And Linda, can you explain why? I don't remember the exact rationale that you provided me.
Hi, Chris. This money gets swept into the internal service fund, and I was just worried about, perhaps worsening the balance in the fund if, the legal services projection for the cash flow was a little bit short, given the range that you discussed.
So,
Mr. Walsh.
It's your choice, but maybe maybe Caitlin can speak to that a little bit more.
okay.
So the way that this account works, whatever's budgeted gets kind of swept over as revenue in the internal service fund. So if it's over or under, you're not going to see the variability in this budget. You're going to see the variability in the internal service fund. So I think the point being, it would be, so the harm is going to be to the internal service fund if it's not a big enough number. It's not going to fault the fund balance any different in the general fund.
But what was the administration's recommendation? Was 200,000? Yes.
The administration's recommendation was 200. Then I believe you had a conversation with Mr. Baldwin, and he gave you a range.
He did.
The administration's recommendation was 200. Then I believe you had a conversation with Mr. Baldwin, and he gave you a range.
He did. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to be clear. The administration had time to comment on what I heard today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. So, Ms. Leclerc, right now is at $200,000. So is there further discussion from this board about reducing this, amending the motion to $300,000? Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, I'll withdraw my request for a friendly amendment, and I guess we shouldn't just cut too fine a knife on it, and we should just, I'd rather not damage the internal service fund, so why don't we just leave? I prefer at this point, after hearing the comments, to just leave it the way you had it, Ms. Leclerc.
Any further comment? Seeing none, all those in favor of this reduction, this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it is unanimous. Any further comments on this budget?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
One of my smaller reductions, again, staying with that theme, in human resources, I'd like to make a motion. It's not very big, but on line 56110, office supplies, to reduce it to the 2020 amount. So reducing it by $108.
I have a second. Mr. DeWitt? Any further comments? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous. Ms. Charlton?
Mr. Brown, I just wanted to let you know, I've gotten a few text messages that people are saying that members of the public have been disconnected from the call.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Kelly? I have to send that over to you. I'm getting a response. I'm hearing an echo, so Mr. Kelly, is there something, or FairTV, Mr. Kelly, is there something we can do?
We currently have a little over 20 people listening in. We were at a high of 30 earlier this evening. I would say if somebody gets disconnected, to try calling back in.
Okay, sorry, my phone is blowing up. It's probably half a dozen people, so I think it may be more than an individual person's line. I'll tell them to call back in, but I think it's on our own.
Let us know, Ms. Charlton, if you continue to get those texts. Okay, any further, where are we, human resources? Okay, moving on, community and economic development. Page 94, 95, Ms. LeClaire.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to make an adjustment to line 50010, regular payroll, for 130,000, and then the matching line for benefits and Social Security on 52,200, and that is to eliminate the proposed business outreach director salary and benefits.
Mr. DeWitt. Seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Okay, so, Ms. LeClaire, can you repeat your motion, please?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion for the community and economic development, line 50010 for regular payroll and line 52,200, and it's to eliminate the proposed business outreach director and related benefits. The amount was 130,000 on the salary line, and I think 42,000 on the Social Security line.
All right, thank you, Ms. LeClaire. Can I have a second, please?
Excuse me, before you vote, Mr. Chairman, this is Linda Gardner. Those were the wrong figures. I just want to give you the correct figures. It wasn't 42,000. It wasn't 42,000 on Social Security. The cut is 130,000 to regular payroll, as Mrs. LeClaire stated. Social Security is reduced by 9,945, and additionally, you would reduce health insurance, which is in another department, but the health insurance figure is 27,873. So there are three items you would be reducing for this position.
Okay. Can I amend my motion to adjust my recommendation for Social Security to line 52,200 to 9,945, and can I do the health insurance line now at the same time, or do we have to go back to that budget?
Ms. Gardner?
I think you could do all three at the same time, given it's related to one position.
Okay, so the health insurance line will be adjusted by 27,873.
Thank you, Ms. LeClaire. Can I have a second? Seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Walsh, you have a comment?
Just that I'm sure she's going to do it, that Ms. Gardner keep track of other amounts for that insurance thing and just give us the total amount at the end if we cut other positions that are in the budget.
Sure, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions, comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. 9 yeas. Okay. Any further comments, questions, motions for this budget? Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, continue with that earlier theme on those three line items. For community and economic development, I'm proposing a cut to line 58,100 education and memberships by $1,000, and also line 58,120 travel and meetings by $500. Both of those reductions will bring those two line items down to fiscal year 20 budgeted figures.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I have a second. Seconded by Mr. DeWitt. comments, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous. Anything else on community and economic development? Seeing none, moving on to Harbor Management Commission, page 97. Going into miscellaneous, sorry, Mr. Walsh.
I have a quick one under Harbor Management Commission. Once again, under office supplies, line 56110, I'm making a motion to reduce their budget by $400 to bring it down to the 2020 budgeted amount.
I have a second. Second by Mr. Testani. Comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
It is unanimous. Okay. Moving on to miscellaneous. Contingency we've addressed. Contribution to surplus. Again, this budget is at zero for fiscal year 21, and fiscal year 20 was $1,330,000. So again, we've talked about fund balance, we talked about contribution to surplus. We know what it means to the rating agencies. It's something we need to keep an eye on. Moving on to page 105, Regional Youth Adult Social Action Partnership. Page 108, see nothing there. 109, Pequot Library. Ms. Marmion?
Thank you, Sheila Marmion. I'd like to make a motion to reduce the contribution to Pequot Library by $50,000.
By 50,000?
Correct.
Okay, do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Mottola. Ms. Marmion, you want to comment?
Sure. In thinking about this motion, I looked back at the nonprofit committee that Mr. DeWitt had actually chaired, and that committee put forth some recommendations on how to look at nonprofits. One of the recommendations they made is that we look at nonprofits, and if they provide a service that the town does not provide, that's one reason to potentially fund them. Pequot Library is a unique institution. It provides library services as well as other services, but if we look at that criteria that Mr. DeWitt's committee put forth, we have two libraries in town, the main library and the branch library. So there's some duplication of some services that Pequot offers. And given the tremendous stress our town is now under and our taxpayers are now under, I believe that this very important public-private partnership should be viewed as Mr. Brown pointed out in the beginning of our conversation, there are going to be some shared sacrifices. And I believe in the spirit of that Pequot, which we funded very generously for $350,000 over many years, and I think that's the right thing to do. But this year, I believe that a $50,000 reduction is appropriate.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Any other comments? Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. I wasn't going to comment, but Ms. Marmion quoted our not-for-profit committee, and that is indeed true. But I will say that, we're going to talk about the libraries in a little bit. For $350,000, I've come to the conclusion that we get a lot of services for $350,000 from Pequot Library. And I'll also say that I was very surprised to find out that the Pequot Library endowment was actually less than the Fairfield Library endowment, which, to be honest with you, after 13 years, I never knew there was an endowment for the Fairfield Library. So I am going to recommend some reductions for the library later, not to ruin it, but I will not support a cut to the Pequot Library, even though in the spirit of the cut, I do understand it, Ms. Marmion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Testani.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, Jack Testani. I just want to dovetail off of what Mr. DeWitt was speaking about in terms of the budget. If you look over the last few years, it's remained the same. I'm in support of keeping it where it is. I think, as Mr. DeWitt was alluding to, endowments, there's certainly donation programs. The Pequot Library serves a unique service to the community, and personally, I'd be in favor of keeping the budget where it is. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Any further comments? Mr. Walsh.
This budget seems like it's under assault every year. It's kind of the same dance we do every year, and generally me and Ms. Marmion, the same people doing this. But I believe that it's like the same dance, same arguments. I'm not really going to get into them extensively, but I think it supplies an extensive amount in excess of third branch library for $350,000, whereas the other Fairfield Woods branch library, which I think is, also valuable to its community where it is, we'll be getting to it. It's well over $1 million, almost $1.2 million. So this budget, to even try to do this year, is I think a very difficult thing to do. I mean, we heard how they're losing their funding. I mean, we all know they've been doing this for almost 100 years. This book sale that they do that has become a cherished thing in our community, and they will not be able to have it because of the social distancing required of this COVID-19 crisis. So it would be specifically harsh to them to now have to take a $50,000 hit on this budget when they are not able to have this sale and some other events that they discussed. I too was kind of surprised and amazed that everyone always thinks that this library has this huge endowment. To find out that our own library has a larger endowment was kind of shocking and surprising. I think it's great. I think that both places should try to continue to raise their endowment. But I think to do this in this year would be insensitive. If we're really in that dire shape, though, if everybody wants to take an equal percentage, I might be convinced into doing that, but it would have to be an equal percentage on every single nonprofit. And that's the only way that I would do it if we're in that dire shape. But I just don't think any of the nonprofits, I think they all provide valuable services, mental health services in some ways, help to the seniors in other ways. We've been dealing with these nonprofits, as we're going to continue to talk about, for years and years, and they provide a safety net or some other service to this town that we all have found very valuable. So I'm not going to support this $50,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Mottola.
Yeah, just a couple of comments and we'll move on. I don't think it's a fair statement to say that Pequot Library's budget's under assault every year. The last time we had discussion about maybe cutting this was during the fiscal crisis back in 2009 time period. So I support this budget just about every year. And so I just wanted to make that clear. And I don't really have anything else to add. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mottola. Ms. Charlton. Ms. Charlton.
Thank you. I wish we didn't have to cut any of the libraries, honestly. I know that this is a difficult year. I know that this becomes necessary. It's it's a tough thing. Libraries seem to be a target, I suppose, when times are tough and no one likes it. I would maybe respectfully disagree a little bit with Mr. Walsh's comment of grouping the Pequot Library in with all our other nonprofits. I do agree with Ms. Marmion's statement that it's as wonderful as it is, a library, and we have others. I go back to another point Mr. Walsh said, if we were to maybe take a proportionate cut, of all of these, I wouldn't put Pequot Library on the same vein as the other nonprofits, but I would suggest that perhaps if we are going to adopt Mr. DeWitt's motion of reducing the budgets for the other libraries, that we look at the three libraries equally. And, I think that's unpleasant, but probably fair in the final analysis.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. Any further comment? Ms. Marmion?
You're on mute, Sheila.
Pequot. Oh, can you hear me? I think it's a bad game, a poor game, not something I want to engage in terms of pitting our libraries, our main library and our branch library versus Pequot. This is not where I'm coming from. Where I'm coming from is we are asking our departments, we are asking potentially our libraries, we are potentially asking departments of public safety to recognize that we're going through a very tough time in this town, and that our taxpayers are going through a very tough time. And so it's really that shared sacrifice, back to what Mr. Brown said at the beginning. And so I'm not doing this, I'm not doing this because I think it's an easy thing to do, but in my mind, a true partnership, and that is the way I see Pequot with our town. A true partnership implies that both sides work together to really to recognize and realize what's possible in these very unique times. So that's why I'm bringing this up and recommending this motion. Thank you.
Sorry. Ms. LeClaire? Mute.
Am I still muted? Okay.
Nope.
Sorry. I have a very hard time supporting this motion because I think Pequot Library does serve as a third branch of our library, but they are a not-for-profit at the same time. And so we only pay a small portion towards their budget. And they kind of made it clear that their main fundraiser this year can't happen. And it's an important event for the whole town. And because of that, I think we have to leave their budget in place this year.
Thank you, Ms. LeClaire. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none, we're going to put this motion to a vote. All those in favor? You have a comment, Ms. Charlton?
Yeah, I just, I wanted to maybe turn it back to Ms. Marmion. Do you want to put forth the motion on the $50,000 amount specifically, or are you, do we want to consider something lower that's more in line with, what we believe may be appropriate for the other libraries?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Testani, I'll get back to you, but the question was from Ms. Marmion. Ms. Marmion, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, my audio cut out a little bit there, Ms. Charlton. So you were saying, do you want me to stick with this motion, or do you want me to potentially make a motion?
She's asking if you want to amend the motion.
Yeah. I wasn't clear. I mean, I think we all understand everyone's point of view here. And before we voted on this motion, is there perhaps a lower reduction that our colleagues might consider, and is it appropriate to maybe amend that before we vote? Just a question, not a suggestion.
Yeah, I would be willing to amend the motion to reduce the reduction to $30,000 if that's more palatable to my colleagues. So maybe we discuss that a little bit, but if there's no interest in, I'm going to say, compromising, then we can vote on the original motion. So maybe my colleagues can weigh in terms of their perspective.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Marmion. Mr. DeWitt.
Very quickly, I won't support a $30,000 reduction either.
Okay, so any further comment? Because right now the motion is for $50,000 reduction. Okay, Mr. Alton.
Sorry, I know we want to move on. I think that, you know, from my perspective, as I said, no one enjoys cutting from funds from any library, but for what it's, I think 50,000 is a, you know, relatively significant portion of the budget, and I would be more amenable to support the motion if it were for an amount that was more consistent with what we're looking at for the other libraries. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. So is there any further discussion on the original motion of a $50,000 reduction? Or consideration for a smaller reduction? Just want to make sure we cover the bases before we take this vote. Mr. Testani?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, just a point of clarification, point of order. This motion would need a second before we could vote on it. I'm just making sure we're aware, that's all.
Right. Right now, the $50,000 is on the table. It's before us. If Ms. Marmion wants to change her motion to a friendly amendment, she's more than welcome to do so.
Again, Mr. Chairman, it doesn't sound as if people are amenable to 30,000. I think we should vote on the 50,000.
Okay.
That's my motion.
All those in favor? Yep, thank you. All those in favor of reducing Pequot Library's funding by $50,000, if we take it to $300,000, say aye.
Aye.
Ms. Marmion, Ms. Charlton, Mr. Mottola. All those opposed? Mr. Walsh, Mr. Testani, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Bateson?
Nay.
Nay. All right, Mr. Brown. So it fails 3-6. We are moving on. LifeBridge Community Services. Discovery Museum. Connecticut Audubon Society. Greater Bridgeport Transit Authority. Fairfield Museum and History. Grasmere. Sullivan. The Kennedy Center. Mill River. The Pilot House. Center for Family Justice. Private school bus transportation, nothing there. Health and Welfare Services. Okay, we're in the finance. Page 146. Questions, comments, motions for finance. Mr. Walsh.
I'd like to make a motion to reduce the part-time grant writer that was added by the first selectman and passed by the Board of Selectmen for $35,000 in salary as documented on page 147. And the requisite benefits, which I believe is $2,000, but I would like to get some confirmation from Ms. Gardner on that.
So, Ms. Gardner, on the $35,000 reduction for Social Security,
That would be $508.
$35,508, Mr. Walsh, is your...
I amend the reduction of the benefits to $508, so a reduction of that.
Okay, can I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Mottola. Comments?
And I'd just like to say that it's just not a year to be adding positions into town hall. And while I think there is money in the finance budget on the fees and professional service line of $27,400 that they could use towards a grant writer, and there should be savings in regard to, we still haven't figured out what we're doing with the, making the, maybe making the interim CFO permanent and getting a new controller. So there definitely will be months to figure that out, and there'll be savings there, which I estimate will be about $15,000 a month. So to the extent that we have those savings for a couple of months, you'd be able to pay for a part-time grant writer if you wanted to do that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any further comments on this motion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous. Any further questions, comments, motions for the Finance Department? Seeing none. Moving on to purchasing. Ms. LeClaire.
Do the line 51030 for part-time payroll and the related line 52200 for Social Security. The payroll number would be $10,000 and the Social Security is $145, and it's to eliminate the proposed part-time help, and I believe that was proposed by administration.
Thank you, Ms. LeClaire. Can I have a second? Second by Mr. DeWitt. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Did you cover Social Security on this, Ms. LeClaire? Yeah, okay. Okay, moving on to purchasing. Nope. Moving on to Assessor's Office. Questions, comments? Tax Collector.
No, Mr. Brown, under Assessor, I'd like to make a motion for a cut to continue with the theme of reducing those three lines. So I'm making a motion to reduce line 56110 office supplies by $500, line 58100 education and memberships by $120, and line 58120 travel and meetings by $825.
Okay, can I have a second?
To bring it all to the 2020 budgeted amount.
Seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Any comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? It is unanimous. Okay, that's Assessor's Office. Tax Collector. We're at Information Technology, page 158, 59, 160. Mr. Testani.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair, Jack Testani. Under information technology, I want to just make sure I have the right line item. let's see.
Capital.
Thank you, sorry. Yeah, so that would be page 163, correct?
Page 163, it is item number 57000.
Right, I just want to make a recommended reduction in the capital line, for IT. I hope I'm saying that correctly, so forgive me if I don't have that exactly correct.
So you want to make a motion to reduce capital outlay?
Yes, sir, but at 1.7 million?
For, I think, 97,250.
97,000, okay, sorry.
Okay, so the motion,
Go ahead, sorry.
the motion before us is 57000 capital outlay for a reduction of $97,250. Thank you, Mr. Testani. Can I have a second? Second by Mr. Walsh. Any comments? Mr. Mottola?
Just so I understand this, that's the total amount's 194.5, and it's going to be reduced by 97,250. Am I looking at the right thing on page 163?
That is correct. And this was a recommendation by the administration.
Right, exactly, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, it
Just want to
was.
make sure.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, any further comments? Ms. Charlton?
I realize this was a recommendation from the administration, and I appreciate them looking for these types of savings. I just have to say, I believe it's incredibly short-sighted to be looking to cut IT budgets in this environment where we are in the midst of this pandemic, and we've got people presumably working from home. And I think every business and every organization, nonprofit out there is realizing the value of technology to kind of keep things running when something like this occurs, and we may be in this for an indeterminate amount of time. The budget that's before us is mostly for replacement, looks like PCs and laptops that are already on a 5-year replacement cycle, which is really long compared to, I would say, what is typical. I think this is short-sighted. I wish we would be instead looking for ways to utilize technology to drive efficiencies and improvements, and certainly make sure that we can keep up with and improve service levels in a period where a lot of people are going to be working from home. So on that basis, I would respectfully, decline to support this motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Charlton. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion before us, say aye. Mr. Walsh, Mr. Testani, Mr. DeWitt, Ms. LeClaire, Mr. Bateson?
It's got me on mute. Aye.
Mr. Bateson's a yes, Mr. Brown's a yes, and opposed? Mr. Mottola, Ms. Charlton, and Ms. Marmy, and motion carries 6-3. Anything else on information technology? Seeing none, Board of Finance. Unemployment compensation. Mr. Testani.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to actually add back into the budget $355,000, if I'm reading that correctly.
I believe it's $250,000.
$250, sir.
Okay, so the motion before us is to add $250,000 to unemployment compensation, line 52510. Is there a second?
52510, right.
second by Mr. Mottola. Any comment? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Okay, going to fire. We're on page 171, 172, and page 173. Is there comments, questions, motions on this department? Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Chris DeWitt. First off, I want to make clear that everyone on this board appreciates all the hard work our firemen and our policemen do every day. But we are in a tough situation this year, and I'm going to recommend a couple of reductions to the fire department with the utmost respect that I can possibly do that. My first reduction is in the capital line, in the form of the staff vehicle, the number 4, 50,000. I would like to reduce the capital line by $50,000. I guess that capital line, Linda, is line 57,000, be reduced by $50,000.
Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Testani. Comments, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Mr. DeWitt?
Additionally, in keeping with the theme of we're not going to be, I don't think we're in a position to be hiring new roles. I'd like to reduce the regular payroll line and the requisite benefits and Social Security for the marshal. The regular payroll would be reduced by $90,000. I think all the benefits and Social Security are approximately $38,000, Linda?
No, actually, the regular payroll will be reduced by $85,001. Your Social Security will be reduced by $1,233. And the health care, which is in a different budget, will be reduced by $27,873.
Great. I'll like to make that motion for Ms. Gardner's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Can I have a second, please? Second by Mr. Walsh. Comments? Mr. Testani?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, Jack Trustani. Just want to, maybe we could sort of review our rationale behind this in the light of having brought up the increase to the building department revenue. We could just sort of review our thought. I know Mr. DeWitt alluded to it. I just think maybe it's a good time to sort of discuss it briefly.
Okay. Mr. DeWitt.
Made the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Chris DeWitt. Specifically during the budget negotiations, I asked the question of the fire chief. You know, the Board of Selectmen increased the revenue by $100,000, and I said, "Is this role, chief, that the fire marshal directly tied to that incremental $100,000?" And his answer was no, it was not. So my recommendation to keep that revenue in and the reduction of this person are completely separate, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any further comments, questions? Okay, all those in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Mr. Mottola is opposed, and this motion carries 8-1. Any other comments, questions, motions for the fire department? Okay, moving on to police. We're on page 179. Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you. Same comment for our for our men and women in blue in the police department, my utmost respect. But in this tough budget year, and in accordance with the administration, I would like to reduce the capital line for, I would like to reduce the cuts, the hybrid vehicle, 4 vehicles, and all the fit outs associated with them. And Linda, I believe that number is $217,394. Linda gave me the thumbs up.
Okay, can I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Testani. Comments, questions? Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Opposed? Moving on. Animal control, page 185. Mr.
I'm
Walsh?
trying to get your attention, I apologize, but I was muted, I'm sorry. I wanted to make a motion under the police, pursuant to
Okay, going back.
what I've been going, so it's just a reduction on
Mr.
line
Police.
5, the police on line 58120, travel and meetings, a reduction of $1,333 to bring the travel and meetings lines back to the 2020 budgeted amount. I did have a conversation with Chief Liddy today, just to clarify that I wasn't making anything, that nothing was popping up there, something new or something coming over from the new ECC, because they do align costs that I was missing, and he assured me that I was not. He said that increase was just simply by doing a 3-year average, and he understood in trying to save money that, you know, he didn't seem to have a problem with reducing it to the 2020 budgeted amount.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Your second? Mr. DeWitt? Comments? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous. Okay, moving on from police, we're at animal control. See nothing, street lights, hydrant and water, emergency management, emergency communication center.
Can I just say something about the ECC for a second?
Mr. Walsh.
I just wanted to say, there are some numbers for the 3 line items that I've been reducing in every department. But after speaking with Chief Liddy today, and he had spoken to Deputy Chief Smith, because that they're building them a new space, because it involves Westport people coming in and them needing some new supplies, we kind of mutually agreed that this line would be excluded from the increases on those 3 lines, at least until, you know, they get settled. Further, Westport's paying for 1/3 of the additional costs for travel and meetings, education and memberships, and office supplies. So if we had done something, we were going to have to reduce revenue. So I just wanted to be clear that I noticed that there was increases in the ECC in those areas. And after the discussion and because of their special circumstances and bringing in the Westport people and them paying for some of those costs, I decided not to make those cuts. But I just wanted to be open and honest because I said I was making changes to everybody at 2020 levels on those lines. And I just wanted to explain that.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Moving to Public Works Administration. Say, yeah, thank you. It's going to say Mr. Basin has to be on mute until he speaks. Let's get Ed on mute. Okay, Public Works Administration, we're on page 202, 203. Let's go to Public Works Operations, page 205, 206, 7.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's Ed Bates, and I have a couple items.
Bateson?
Yeah, I'd like to start off with line item 57000, capital. And I'd like to propose a reduction of that by half, which is approximately $334,000.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Basin. Can I have a second, please? Seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Questions, comments?
Now, my only rationale here is that, it looks like there's a pretty decent requisition here for about $675,000 in equipment. I just feel that, in this time, let's approach it by, just half of that. They can pick and choose whatever equipment they want out of that. It seemed like there was a lot of vehicles. They could probably put that off until next year.
Mr. Mottola?
Thank you. The only concern I have is when we questioned Mr. Carey about this, and I wrote it down, he said these are an absolute necessities. And then I have a note, Walsh, get a priority list. Did we ever get a priority list on any of these things?
Nope. That's the problem. We never got a priority list, and we just have to do it ourselves. So I don't know how to handle it. So,
Ms. Charles, I'm sorry, Mr. Mottola?
No, I just remember Mr. Carey being adamant that these vehicles are all falling apart, and they're an absolute necessity, and so I just wanted to throw that out there. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Lori Charlton. Yes, I remember the discussion as Mr. Mottola did, and I think when Mr. Walsh asked about a priority list, Mr. Carey, I think, said they were all a priority, and he talked about how much that budget, the $667,000, had been cut already from the original request they put forth. It was cut significantly in the original budget process with the first selectwoman that's then passed through the Board of Selectmen. I found his case to be persuasive. He did say kind of what Mr. Mottola described, that you had a bunch of vehicles that were falling apart. This is probably one of those things that will cost us more in the end. So I will respectfully decline to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. So the department request was for 667.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Walton, Ms. Charlton?
I'm sorry, yes, it was. I was just recalling from the discussion with Mr. Carey that originally when the department put forth their budget, it was significantly higher than this, and was reduced to 667 by the first selectwoman, which, fine, a necessary reduction, but Mr. Carey again had I thought, a fairly compelling argument that this was, these were absolute necessities, and thus the reason for my view on this. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Charlton. Mr. Walsh?
Well, I mean, if Mr. Carey thought he needed more than that, he should have put it down here and let the first selectman cut him back. But that's not what happened. The two numbers are the same. But secondly, we need a director of the department, and we need a plan, which we don't seem to have. We asked for one a while back on the Board of Finance, and we actually got a plan. And then the previous first selectman, the very first year, veered from the plan. So, and at that time when we came up with a plan, it involved bonding to do a little catch up, and then we were going to fund a certain amount per year to have a plan. And we got a big thick book of everything they needed, and basically in the very first year of the plan, we took the plan and we threw it in the garbage can. I think we need to get a director in the department in. Someone needs to get hired. Mr. Carey or somebody, if he wants to stay and the first selectwoman wants him to stay. But something needs to happen. We need to get somebody in there, and a plan needs to be developed, and then we can get this thing back on track. Because, I don't know who's, what's going on with it. So I'm fine with cutting it by half for right now, and hopefully hopefully we'll get a new director and he can meet with us and we can start getting a plan back together.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any further comment? Okay, we'll take a vote. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 That, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Testani, Mr. DeWitt, Ms. Leclerc, Mr. Basin, Mr. Brown, and opposed? Ms. Charlton, Mr. Mottola, and Ms. Marmon. Okay, motion carries 6-3. Mr. Basin, turning it back to you.
Yes. Another one, line item 57002, paving. I'd like to propose a reduction in that in $1 million. And the intent in that is that I believe the majority of us on this board would support bonding that, even though I don't find that pleasurable. The times we're in dictates that I should be flexible in certain things that I've held dear to over the past several years. So while I don't like the idea of bonding paving, I'm willing to entertain it because I know that the roads aren't that great and we should maintain them.
Thank you, Mr. Basin. Do I have a second? Seconded by Ms. Charlton. Any comments? Ms. Marmion.
Thank you. I support this motion. I just have a question, point of clarification. Maybe it comes from the administration. It's my understanding we actually have a policy that we are not to bond paving, that we keep it in the operating budget. Do we need to amend that policy, or are we okay to go forward if this motion passes?
Okay, does Mr. Bremer or Ms. Kupchak want to answer? If,
Ms. Marmion, I believe that's a Board of Finance policy,
It is.
if I'm not mistaken, I was told.
okay, thank you, Ms. Kupchak. That
Thank
was
you.
a policy.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
It's a policy. It was a policy from the Board of Finance, but it was requested from the RTM, I believe, and so we did put that into place years ago. Same with it falls in line with the fleet and the purchasing of vehicles and bonding the vehicles. We went on a plan. We kind of progressed from bonding paving to putting it into the budget. All right, and we slowly did this over a number of years until the paving as a whole was put into the operating budget up to sometimes more, $2 to $3 million. And so it's something we'll discuss as we move on. This is another cliff. I think that we as a board would certainly want to revisit that and keep this in the operating budget and going forward. But given this year, you know, we're taking that policy and we're putting it to the side so we give the taxpayer immediate relief on the tax rate. Any further comments? Ms. Charlton.
Just briefly, my support for the motion to reduce $1 million is really based on the understanding that our board is willing to bond the additional $1 million, particularly in the beach area. Many of the roads are a disaster, candidly, frankly. So I really think that we do need to do this maintenance. It's important, and so I thank everyone for their views on this and flexibility to put the policy aside for a year, because I don't think that we can, get by with $1 million given the state of many of the roads in town that are really in bad shape, and which will cost us more to completely redo if we continue to, cut back this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. So are you asking the board to say now, that they have a sense of the body, to support for this year and this year only $1 million of bonding for paving?
You know, honestly, I wasn't, sorry, Lori Charlton. I wasn't thinking of asking for that formally. I certainly, it would be nice to hear if everyone has the same view. That was my understanding, that we all might have that same view. I know that the administration originally suggested a higher amount. If you...
So we could go around. Look, Mr. Basin, would that be
Jim, that was my intent in the reduction. You know, ideally, I would like to reduce and not pave, but I realize that the roads are in horrible shape. So my intent is that if this came around in a bond resolution this year, I would fully support the $1 million.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments on this motion before us? Seeing none, we'll take it to a vote. All those in favor of this motion, say aye.
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 Okay, it is unanimous. Mr. Basin?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. One more item for me on this one. Line item 57001, the fleet maintenance. I'd like to remove the fleet maintenance of $300,000. I guess I'll wait for a second.
Yeah. Line item 57001.
Yes, reduction in the amount of $300,000.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Basin. Can I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Mottola. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, I'd like to address it. I understand where Mr. Bremer, the policy. Next year, I'd be willing to take up this conversation. I think we got just derailed by COVID. Haven't had enough time to vet this, and quite frankly, I just don't think it's the time to enter into this program right now. Yes, I am going to hear from the administration that the vehicles, you know, we have too many, they're broken down. I get it. But I have to empathize with the general public right now that a lot of us are going through these decisions in our household. Can I get the boiler through one more year? Can I get the roof through one more year? I've got a college tuition payment coming up. There's a lot of juggling in our personal households now, and I don't want to go out and, you know, buy these cars right now. I just don't think it's a good optic. I think we need to tighten our belts and empathize with the general public right now.
Thank you, Mr. Basin. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris DeWitt. I just want to say that the general concept of this program I am in favor of, and I think in the next 12 months, it would give the administration opportunity to give us a plan, how this is going to happen. I mean, we really never talked about, you know, the how. We just talked about the how much. I think if we figure out what the how is with a vehicle replacement plan, I think this could be successful next year's budget, given we don't have COVID-20 and things like that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any further comments? Seeing none, we'll put this to a vote. All in favor? Say aye.
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 Opposed? It's unanimous. Okay, any further actions on public work operations? Seeing none, we'll go to building, page 212, 213. Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris DeWitt, with all respect to Mr. Connolly and his department and the revenue that they bring in, we again, the theme of the night is not hiring new people. So I would like to reduce the part-time payroll line of 51030 to 0 from its amount today of $35,490. And Linda, I don't think that has any requisite Social Security, correct?
Yes, it has $515 in Social Security.
Even better. Please add that to my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Can I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Testani. Comments? Mr. Mottola.
So on my budget book, I have a big note here that Mr. Connolly said this is no cost to the town because it's paid for by blight fees. And then he said that this would be a benefit because it would help them collect fees. So I don't know if I wrote that down wrong, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Mr. DeWitt?
So my personal guideline this year was to look and see if there was a revenue line associated with these positions. I've already spoken about the fire marshal. I had a conversation with Mr. Calabrese about the Parks and Rec director, and by the way, that had revenue associated with it. So, I mean, I'm not going to recommend reducing that. This doesn't have requisite revenue associated with it, so it might be true, and I'm not saying Mr. Connolly was telling us an untruth, but I don't see a revenue line item in there, so that was kind of my guideline for this tough fiscal year, John.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Any further comment? Seeing none. All in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Mr. DeWitt, back to you. On capital. We have capital here for building 5,182.
Oh, we sure do, don't we? Can I make a recommendation to reduce that to zero from $5,182?
Okay, so that is in capital outlay, line 57000. The motion is to reduce that by $5,182. Can I have a second? Seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Testani. Any comment? Seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hear me?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. Any opposed?
Me, Jim Walsh.
It's
Jim Walsh is opposed.
Mr. Walsh is opposed. Okay, so let's go around. You guys are standing with some losing connection, so I want to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor, let me go around. Mr. DeWitt?
Yes.
Right.
Sorry, Ms. Charlton, you have a question on the motion?
Yeah, and I apologize. Thank you for taking my question. This is $5,000 for 2 storage cabinets. It's a small amount. I mean, did we have a discussion as to? I remember hearing during the budget discussion that the office was in rough shape, and they were, I don't know. Did we have discussion that someone with this? Or are we just like, did we just eliminate it because it's a small amount and we're eliminating it? I guess I'm trying to understand if it's needed and if we need to bother making, if we should
Mr. DeWitt,
for $5,000.
so this is on a list, but it's not on our original list. So, Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, I would suggest with all the revenue that they're bringing in, because they have so much work, that they clearly need to store stuff in different places. And I think that they could use this place to store the vast amount of work that they're bringing in, especially with Fairfield U and Sacred Heart bringing all these additional projects.
Okay.
So that's the reason I can't support it.
I'll remove my motion.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. DeWitt. I appreciate that.
Ms. Charlton.
Mr. Walsh.
You're
happy.
Remember
I'm
that.
happy.
Remember that, Chris.
That was right at the bell. Right at the bell, because we were about to take a vote, and I saw Ms. Charlton.
Mr. Chairman.
For it too.
Glad we can agree on the big things.
All right, there we go. We're doing well. Mr. Testani, you had a question or comment?
I just wanted, in the light of keeping everybody happy, I'd like to withdraw my second.
Thank you. Very good. So now we're moving on to engineering. We're on page 217, 218. Ms. Leclerc. Is it me?
No, Mary's
Okay,
on.
Mary. Mary, you're on, can't hear you.
It doesn't, oh, you're muted, Mary, definitely. You have a little red.
Your phone is muted, Mary. I'm getting, a message from our IT director.
Okay,
There you
can
go.
you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
All
very
right,
good.
sorry about that, everyone. I'd like to make a motion to adjust line 51050, for 10,000, and the related, Social Security line 52200, for 765, and that's to reduce the proposed, overtime. It's a new amount. It's an incremental amount that we were adding. And so I'd like to reduce that amount.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Leclerc. Can I have a second? Second by Mr. DeWitt. Any comments? Mr. Mottola.
I'm sorry, Mary, you want to reduce it by $10,000? Is that what it is?
Yes, I'm reducing overtime by 10,000 and Social Security by 745.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any questions, comments?
Can I add one thing? That was as recommended by administration on this sheet.
Thank you, Ms. Leclerc. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Anything else on engineering? Going to health, page 224, 225. Anything on health? Seeing none, going to human and social.
Jim?
Mr. Walsh?
I have a small motion, to reduce, pursuant to the theme, line 58120, travel and meetings, by $600. I did speak to Mr. Sam's Cleary today, just to make sure, because I know that there's an additional nurse, and to make sure that the travel and meetings was not like the travel for the nurse or something like that, because this is a new nurse, and he confirmed that it was not. It was basically just a 3-year average increase. He understood why we were making why I would be making the motion, and seemed to be fine with it.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Can I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Testani. Any comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Moving to Human and Social Services. This is our senior center. Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is Chris DeWitt. First off, I want to show my appreciation to Ms. DeMarco and her entire team. They're doing yeoman's work at the senior center, especially during this crisis. I'm going to make a reduction to the Bigelow Center Director, and it's painful for me to do so, but in the spirit of not increasing any manpower this year, and in coordination with the administration, I'd like to remove $66,267 from the the regular payroll line 51010. And as I discussed with Linda today, we had removed $32,000. We had moved $32,000. I'd like to make sure that that $32,000 is reinstated to this budget, and then the requisite benefits and Social Securities, please, Linda.
I can give you those figures. You're correct, 51010 is a reduction of 66,267. Line 51030 is an increase of 32,489. And line 52200 is a decrease of 4,598.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gardner. Mr. DeWitt, is that your motion?
That is my motion. Thank you, Linda.
Okay, can I have a second, please? Seconded by Mr. Walsh. Any comments? Ms. Marmion?
Thank you. I am going to support this motion, but I echo Mr. DeWitt's comments that this is really unfortunate that this has to happen, and it's just because of the pandemic. And I really hope that we revisit this in next year's budget, because I think it's an important part of our budget and should happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of this motion? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Anything else on human and social service? Seeing none, solid waste and recycling? Okay, we're going into culture and recreation. We are at the library, the main branch. Comments, questions, motions? Library main branch. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Walsh.
I have the thematic cuts to, so I'd like to make a motion to reduce for the library in lines 58,100, education and memberships by $200, and line 58,120, travel and meetings by $100.
Okay, thank you. Comments, questions on that motion? If I have a second, I need a second. Second by Mr. Testani. Comments, questions? Okay, all those in favor of that motion, say aye. It's Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Testani, Mr. Walsh, Ms. Marmion, Ms. LeClaire, Mr. Bateson, Mr. Brown, Ms. Charlton's in favor. Okay, opposed? Mr. Mottola is opposed.
I don't think.
Sorry, Johnny. Are you in favor? Okay, so Mr. Mottola is in favor, so motion passes 9-0. 9-0. Okay, very good. Anything else on the library main branch? Mr. DeWitt?
Sorry, I got lost there. We're on library main branch?
We are library main branch, page 237, 238, 239, and 240.
My audio was going in now. What was the last motion was on the library?
Yes, but it was to reduce.
It was to reduce education and memberships by $200 and travel meetings by $100 pursuant to keeping it to 2020 levels.
Got it. Okay. My apologies. My audio was bugging. I'm going to make a motion to reduce the overall library main budget by $100,000 of part-time payroll. That's line 51030. And then I would like to further reduce the materials line, which is, for some reason I can't find it. Materials, that's wrong. Library materials, 56180, by an additional $100,000 for a total of a $200,000 cut. And get your second, and I'll say a couple if there is a second.
Can I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Testani. Go ahead, Mr. DeWitt.
So thank you. This is a 7% reduction in the overall budget. This is a $2.7 million budget. I truly believe that going into next fiscal, we hear about materials a lot. We hear we have to renew materials, which I get, and we have materials that are being beat up by people using them. I truly believe that there's going to be a slowdown in the libraries as they open again. I think there'll be less of a call for hardcover materials and more of a call for electronic materials, which we have. And frankly, I think the library is going to be open less next year because I'm frankly expecting some resurgence of this that'll cause us to close the libraries and common centers just as if we had in this year. So that's the rationale for my 7.2% reduction in this budget.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any further comments on this motion? Ms. Marmion?
So Mr. DeWitt, you may be correct. The library may be, we don't know. It might be closed. I understand the some of the reduction in part-time payroll. I certainly would not support this full amount that you're recommending. But I'd just like to remind everybody, we heard so much when you go back to 2000, I think it was 2008, the last recession, of the role that our public libraries played in terms of offering people a place with special programs, employment programs where they would build their resumes, look for jobs. It was really, it was an essential service for so many of our taxpayers when they were going through tough economic times. That's number one. Number two, obviously, from a materials standpoint, I don't understand this cut. I think more than ever, supporting a materials budget, a robust materials budget, is essential. People are home, people are furloughed, unemployed, they want to access materials. This is not the time, in my mind, to make what I think is a pretty draconian cut. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Mr. DeWitt.
So if I can respond, the library really does seem to be doing a great job of doing things online. I get an email pretty much every day telling me about a new program that the library is offering online, and I see everyone spinning, so I hope everyone can hear me still. I think the transition to the electronic environment has gone pretty well, and frankly, I think that's going to be the nature of libraries going forward.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any further comments? Okay, seeing Ms. Charlton.
Ms. Charlton.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate Mr. DeWitt's comments, and I think we're probably going to have some disruption in hours, just given what's going on and the need for continuing physical distancing at points in time. So I guess I can get my head around a reduction in part-time payroll on that basis, although that one's pretty steep. I do the materials budget. I would just encourage us to not go that deep on it. I mean, they are doing a great job, to Mr. DeWitt's point, but just from my own experience, which is just what it is, there's oftentimes a really lengthy waiting period to check out a digital book, an audio book, et cetera. I mean, I don't get the sense that we're, that we have too much in here. So I think in the spirit of the shared sacrifice we talked about, I would, I understand the need to do something here, but I can't support this motion because I just think these cuts are far too deep. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. Mr. Walsh and then Mr. Mottola.
I mean, I think we're a little bit, I understand what they're seeking, but I have to agree with Mr. DeWitt you know, in the last year, we've been closed on this library for the last couple of months, plus we were closed during when the place flooded, and some of the materials were replaced pursuant to insurance money. So there's always been, and they've always told us that when the books and stuff get used, that you have to replace, but there's going to be a definite savings because the books have not been used as much as possible as during both instances, COVID and the closure of the library for, I think it was at least 2 months, if it wasn't already.
Oh, more than that.
So for the water pipe break. And I also think that we don't know when it's going to start. And when it does start, I think from what I'm reading that there's a big fear of people wanting to take these materials out because they're just not going to be very confident in whether they've been cleaned and where the books or materials have been, the ones that leave the place. So for all those reasons, I think that the limited, at least for this year, the limited amount of reduction is about right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. To Mr. Mottola.
Thank you. I think the cut's too deep, but I understand where everyone's coming from. I would like to make a motion to amend this and to reduce the payroll cuts by $50,000. So cut the part-time payroll $50,000 and a $50,000 cut to materials at the main branch. That would be my motion to amend Mr. DeWitt's motion.
Okay, do I have a second to the amendment? Ms. Marmion seconds it. Comments on the amended motion? Ms. Marmion.
I think it's fair, fairer, let's put it that way. And I just want to point out that there's been a lot of discussion about virtual materials. And just to point out, these are more expensive than the traditional, hardcover, paperback materials, et cetera. They're more expensive to purchase. And I think somebody mentioned, you're right, we are accessing them more, but there happens to be a longer wait period, so it's a frustration for people. So we actually, if we could buy more of those digital, et cetera, books, et cetera, it would benefit many people if the library is closed now and if it's closed in the future. But I do support this amendment. I think it's a good compromise. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Ms. Tarleton.
Yes, I agree with Ms. Marmion. I do support the amendment. I recognize what Mr. DeWitt said, that this is a 7% reduction to the budget, but I'm not sure that's the right way to look at it. It's roughly a 20%, more than a 20% cut to materials, and that's a lot. And to Ms. Marmion's point, to I think all of our experiences where there's a 12+ week wait for anything that's remotely new in terms of a book. I think this is deep, and I do think there are going to be more. So I hear what everybody's saying. I would encourage us to not cut in excess of 20% of their materials budget. Thank you. So I support the amended motion.
Mr. DeWitt, I just want to go to Mr. Bates, and then I'll come back up to you. Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I don't support the amendment. I don't see these numbers as unreasonable in this climate. I mean, an hour ago, I voted to reduce 5 police cars out of a 10-car request. We're just in a whole new world right here. If we want to explore virtual, learning at the library, then I think that's a discussion the library board should have, and there should be a quid pro quo that if they're going to transition to an online service, then there should be a reduction in staffing. I mean, that's a whole separate conversation. So I mean, at this point in time, I mean, these really, compared to these line items, I mean, yeah, if you're talking 20%, that might seem significant, but I mean, that's in line with fiscal year 19 levels. So we're not that far off here. So in this climate, I think this is a cut that is manageable, and quite frankly, it's expected by the taxpayer. So I don't agree with the amendment. I agree with DeWitt's proposal, and that's where I am. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Basin. Back to you, Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you. Listen, I respect my colleagues, Ms. Marmion and Ms. Charlton's point of view. So my first point is endowment. That, hey, didn't even know going into this budget season there was one for the library. So I would offer up that there's something there for endowment. I really don't want to support Mr. Matola's amendment, but I will support this. If the body would rather, I'll take a $200,000 cut, $100,000 to regular payroll, $100,000 to part-time payroll, and leave the materials just as you are, because you make a convincing you make a convincing argument about materials, and Mr. Bateson makes a convincing argument. If you have less materials that you're handing out, then, you know, when we're in a virtual world, we need less people. So I would be willing to amend my motion to make the cut to $100,000 from regular payroll line and $100,000 from part-time payroll line. So we got like 85 motions on the floor, Jim.
Yeah, so let's not complicate things too much. Well, let's stick with the amendment that Mr. Matola had, and soon I'd like to take a vote on that, okay?
Yeah.
So we can have a few more comments on Mr. Matola's amendment, then I'd like to take a vote. So any other, Ms. Charlton, do you have a comment on Mr. Matola's amendment?
Not on Mr. Matola's amendment, thank you.
Okay. Any further comments on Mr. Matola's amendment? Seeing none, let's take a vote. I'm sorry, Ms. Leclerc.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify his amendment, and maybe if he could possibly separate it into two separate pieces.
So the amendment's pretty. It's Mr. DeWitt's motion was one motion, and so his motion was to cut $100,000 part-time payroll and $100,000 for materials. My amendment is to reduce that cut and do $50,000 cut for part-time payroll, $50,000 cut to materials. That's it.
Right, let's call the
Okay.
vote.
So what I'd like to do is vote on that amendment, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so on Mr. Matola's amendment, a $50,000 reduction in part-time payroll, $50,000 in library materials. All those in favor, say aye. Mr. Matola, Ms. Charlton, Ms. Marmion. All those opposed? Mr. Bateson, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Testani, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Brown. Okay, so that amendment fails to the motion. Now we're back to Mr. DeWitt's original motion.
Which I'm willing to amend.
Which Mr. DeWitt is willing to have a friendly amendment. And Ms. Charlton, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. To Mr. DeWitt's amendment, I appreciate part of his point. I just don't think that it would be responsible for us to, make that trade and cut regular payroll, because we just really don't know what that means. I mean, I don't know, the personnel level required to run these functions. I don't know anything about that. So I would hate to see us make a hasty amendment without having had any input at all from the library staff. I do appreciate the point in that you know, we've all been talking about materials and, you know, the desire to not, you know, not cut that deeply into that element of it. I also hear Mr. Bateson's point, and I get it. I do. I mean, you know, listen, there's, you know, nobody likes any of this. But I do kind of object to the notion that this is a, you know, a big number. I mean, I think it's, you know, listen, for anybody that uses the library, it's I don't think we have an overabundance of stuff. I think there's a healthy wait time for all the digital materials. Maybe it's just because I'm picking the popular ones. I don't know. But if you look at anything that's been out in the last couple of years, you're waiting for a while. So I think that's probably consistent for you know, all of the users. And I think we've got a lot more people using the materials and the programs, which are great. You know, our library is fantastic. You know, having lived in another community where we had nothing remotely like this, you know, I think we should appreciate what, you know, what an asset this is to our town. And you know, that's why you know, the part-time payroll, I get it. I can understand the reduced hours, part of which may be forced upon us, but you know, I would urge us to just reconsider taking that deep of a cut to the materials budget. And, you know, again, I wouldn't be comfortable trading it off with regular payroll because I just don't know what that means and, you know, how that would work. So that's it. I'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. Mr. DeWitt?
So, sorry, Chris DeWitt. You know, to Mr. Bateson's point, I have personally made some reductions today that I was not real happy about. I was really not happy about reducing Ms. DeMarco's person. I was not real happy about reducing capital for the police car or the fire department. There's a $7 million endowment that and I've said it now 3 times, that we knew nothing about going into this budget season. So, you know, I'll leave it up to you guys. I'm looking for a 7% reduction. If we want to take it out of payroll, I understand Ms. Charlton's point, but I think if we cut it out of materials, which is what my original thought was, that somebody can dip into that $7 million, just like we're going to ask Pequot to dip in after not having not having their one largest book sale of the year.
Can I'm sorry, Mr. Brown, can I just ask another question to follow up on the endowment? Again, Lori Charlton.
Not the endowment.
Endowments are obviously have restrictions attached to them, and I thought I recalled, I might be mistaken, but I did not think that endowment was to be used for materials. I thought it, you know, there was some physical construction stuff, et cetera. So I may be wrong on that, but at least that was how I understood it. On Pequot, my understanding was that they would, you know, fund 4% or 5% of their operating budget every year with their endowment. So it was a little bit different of a situation. And it, you know, if anybody has any comment on that's helpful. But that's my only question to follow up what Chris said.
All right, thank you, Ms. Charlton. I'm gonna want to put this to a vote. Okay, Mr. Mottola.
That's fine, but I recall they're not able to use their endowment for what you're saying, Mr. DeWitt. That was my recollection. Maybe they have to change how they can use it. I agree. Maybe that's what they need to do. But I think we asked that specific question, if I recall, and the answer was they were limited on how they're able to use that endowment. So, but let's move on. I agree. I think
so Mr. DeWitt's motion.
Hold on, Chris.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mr. Mottola, I'm ready.
Tell me what
Mr. DeWitt.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I'm just ready to take this vote, and we can move on.
Me too.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion before us, say aye. Mr. Walsh, Mr. Testani, Mr. DeWitt, Ms. LeClaire, Mr. Bateson, Mr. Brown. All those opposed is Mr. Mottola, Ms. Charlton, and Ms. Marmion. Okay, motion carries 6-3. We're going to Library Fairfield Woods. Mr. DeWitt.
Well, this should be fun. I'm going to make a recommendation to reduce Fairfield Woods Library part-time payroll by $75,000 and reduce the materials by $25,000 for an overall reduction of $100,000, which, by the way, is just a hair over an 8% increase.
Okay, do I have a second? Second by Mr. Testani, and open for comments. Mr. Mottola.
So and I want to do this quickly, for the same reasons that I mentioned on the main branch. I would amend Mr. DeWitt's motion to have a $37,000 cut to the part-time payroll and a $12,000 cut to materials at the Fairfield Woods branch. And I would make that amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Marmion. Comments on the amendment? Any comments on the amendment? Ms. Marmion.
Yeah, I just want to comment that we've heard these figures before, but Fairfield Woods Library is the busiest branch library in Connecticut. I just want to point out it's used by so many, and I think this cut also is too big that Mr. DeWitt recommended, again, for the same reasons that we went through on the main branch, and I would support Mr. Mottola's amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Marmion. Any further comments on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, we'll take a vote on Mr. Mottola's amendment as before us. All those in favor, Ms. Charlton, Mr. Mottola, Ms. Marmion, opposed. All those opposed, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Tissutani, Mr. Walsh, and Mr. Batesy, Ms. Leclerc, and Mr. Brown. So that motion fails 3-6. Back to Mr. DeWitt's original motion. Any comments? Seeing none, let's put this to a vote. All those in favor of Mr. DeWitt's motion, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Testani, Mr. DeWitt, Ms. Leclerc, Mr. Bateson, Mr. Brown. All those opposed would be Mr. Mottola, Ms. Charlton, and Ms. Marmion. Okay. That passes 6-3. We're moving on to Penfield. Any comments, questions on Penfield Pavilion Complex? Seeing none, Parks and Rec. Seeing none. On the waterfront. Marina. Did I miss you, Mr. Walsh? You're on mute, sorry.
I'm sorry about that. Parks and Rec, one of my thematic cuts to line 58-100 to education and memberships, $1,000 to bring it back to the 2020 budget year.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Do I have a second? Second by Ms. Leclerc. Comments? Seeing no comments, all those in favor, say aye. 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 Opposed? It is unanimous. Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Can I make just a comment as we go into Marina, but it ties into Parks and Rec, because in regards to the thematic changes, Parks and Rec reduced their travel and meetings lines by $800 this year from the 2020 number, but increased Marina by $500 because they basically just moved the expense over there. So I'm not making any cuts to the travel and meeting lines to either Parks and Rec or Marina, because it was really just a transfer, because they broke out the cost better. So I just wanted to let everybody know. I'm just trying to be honest, and I'm trying to do this globally for the town. Thanks.
Okay, I'll just go back to waterfront, Marina. Okay, moving on, we're on page 258, 259 for the Carl J. Quickly Golf Course. Mr. Walsh.
I've got several reductions. The first one is on line, is thematic change, is on line 58-100, education and memberships. for the Carl Dickman Golf Course by only $25, but it just is consistent with all the other changes. And then, so I don't know if you want them separately or you want me to make them both at the same time, because then I have a change to capital. So if you want me to break them out into separate votes, I will.
On capital, yeah, let's take care of this one, then we'll go to capital.
Sure.
Can I have a second on this one? 58,100. Any second to it? Okay, I'll second it.
$25.
Comments? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Back to you, Mr. Wall.
Okay, I'd also like to make a reduction on their capital account. We had them on the phone. Prior to us getting on the phone, I had already spoken to Mr. Calabrese and Peter, the superintendent, in regards to whether they could reduce their capital line. And they both said they could. They would prefer to keep the chemical storage shed in for $11,500 because they'd had an OSHA violation because of the shed. The administration has posed in their suggested reductions that we remove all of it. I just don't want any more OSHA violations. I think we should just get the shed done with for $11,500, and so that's why I'm going to make a reduction of $45,000 as my recommended cut to that capital line.
Thank you. Seconded by Mr. Mottola. Any questions, comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? All in favor. Okay, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Mottola? Mr. Claire, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Bateson, Mr. Brown, all those opposed? So Sheila and Laura, are you in favor?
Sorry, I missed that. I was in favor. Sorry.
Okay, Mr. Charles in favor, okay. So it is unanimous. Anything else on the Dickman Golf Course? Seeing none. We're at H. Smith Richardson Golf Course, page 263. Mr. Walsh.
Yes. Once again, we had a presentation. I had once again spoke to Peter, our superintendent, and Anthony Calabrese from Parks and Rec regarding whether we could get rid of the capital line for the one piece of equipment, which was that sprayer for $54,000. And they said that they could make it last hopefully another year. So I'd like to make a reduction of $54,000.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Do I have a second? Second by Ms. Charlton. Any comments? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it is unanimous. All right, so we keep going. We've done retiree benefits. We are at debt service. So I'm going to on line 586 bonds. I'm going to make a motion to reduce this line by $126,167, which is the savings from refunding. Can I have a second? Second by Ms. LeClaire. Questions? Mr. DeWitt, do you have a question? Are you ready for the vote?
Just second thing.
Okay.
No.
Getting a little ahead of me here. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, it's unanimous. Okay, moving to staying on debt service, going to 58600, redemption of bonds. We're going to take that 1.3 million and add $1 million to it for a reduction of 2.3 million to increase use of reserves from the debt service funds. Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Testani. Questions?
Sorry.
Seeing no questions, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that is unanimous. So, we're going to keep moving, we're going to, self-supporting. We're gonna go to Water Pollution Control Authority. And on line item 43001, current sewer use fees, we are going to make an adjustment, reduce that line by $93,638. That's to offset reduced expenditures, which we'll get to next. So can I have a second? Second by Mr. DeWitt. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, we're on page 293 now. 293?
293?
Okay, we're gonna go to page 294. And we are gonna reduce the health insurance line 52100 by $12,932. Can I have a second? Seconded by Ms. Leclerc. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Okay, moving to line 52310. Retirement contribution to the town. We're increasing that by $92,750. And that is that's from the ADAC new mortality rate table. So I have a second? Second by Ms. Charlton. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, it's unanimous. And then finally to item 54150, motor vehicle fuel and lube. We're gonna add $13,820, which is a correction. So I need a second. Second by Ms. Leclerc. All those in favor? Say aye. It's unanimous. Okay, Ms. Gardner.
Hey, can I ask you a question on, I didn't reduce any or make any motions on WPTA on, lines for travel and meetings or for, the line for education and memberships. And both of those lines went up significantly. I know Mr. Bateson has, been on that authority, and I don't know whether you have any reasoning. I can't remember whether we asked why those lines went up so dramatically. Education memberships is going up by double. And the other one, travel and meetings is going up by double as well.
No, Jim, it's Ed. Off the top of my head, I can't recall why that would happen unless we have somebody else that's getting certified in plant management or something along those lines. But that's way in the deep grass. I wouldn't know that.
Yeah, because we also have travel and meetings going from $7,700 budgeted to $14,000, but it might not be the actual.
Mr. Walsh, it looks like Ms. Gardner has an answer. Ms. Gardner?
Well, I actually don't recall myself, but I'm just looking at the three-year actuals, and I think they're in line with the three-year actuals. I don't recall if that was the justification.
Okay. Well, maybe the RTM can work on that one. They can ask the questions. We'll leave them something.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
And Mr. Chairman, do you want to also reduce their one revenue line to bring them
I think I did.
in balance?
43001?
Yes.
We did that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Thank you.
So we are through this budget book, and Ms. Gardner, how much time do you need?
I can get this to you tomorrow. I can give you a generalized feel for what you've done tonight. You're approximately at a 0.4 tax increase, or marginally, maybe marginally less.
Okay. Thank you, Ms.
But,
Gardner. No, I understand. Thank you for keeping up the way you did, and I appreciate the fact you can't get it right on the dot there, but we know that we are at 0.4 increase. And I think that's a job well done, and we've done what we had to do. And again, I appreciate everybody's effort into this. This was a full-blown 9-member effort with the administration, with the Board of Ed. I think our communication was just where it needed to be for us to get through this. This was one long budget season, and hope we never have this type of budget season, at least as long as I'm on this board. So, again, thank you, everybody, and I'll turn it over for any comments. Mr. DeWitt, you have a comment?
Yeah, just a moment of personal privilege. I want to thank Mr. Brown as our chairman. This was definitely not a normal budget season, and he has been going 24/7 ever since this started, and provided a lot of great leadership to all 9 of us. I think the communication under his leadership with everyone in our organization and with the Board of Education has just been fantastic, and I want to make sure that he's recognized for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Mottola. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I want to echo what Chris DeWitt said too. You were terrific, Jim, and I really appreciate your leadership here. This was horrible. It was hard to do. Every day seemed like it was the same day. We're all living through this, and you did a great job, and I want to congratulate you. And I really mean that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that, and believe me, I appreciated working with every one of you to get to where we needed to get to. Ms. Charlton.
Yes, no, not to make this a complete love fest, because we've obviously had some disagreements tonight, but we do thank you for your inclusive leadership style and for, for leading us through this difficult process. We really appreciate it, and this being my first year on this board, it's might be a stretch to say it's been a pleasure, because obviously there's been some stress points, but I appreciate all of you and appreciate working with all of you, and again, especially to Jim, thank you again for your leadership, truly.
Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate that. No, thank you all, and we'll be back together fairly shortly. We have what do we have? It's May. We have a quarterly meeting, and then the RTM votes on June 1, and then we will set the mill rate on June 4th. So if you could just remember to put that in your calendar, I'll get Jennifer to get something out if she hasn't already. So we are, we'll set the mill rate on June 4th, and we'll, if the RTM has any questions or comments for any of us, I'm sure they know that they can reach out to us, and we'll be glad to answer what we can and support them over the next 3 weeks. To the Finance Department, Tom, Caitlin, Linda, thank you. Ms. Kupchak, thank you. Now we need a motion. Mr. Walsh.
We just have to, somehow in our schedule of upcoming meetings, hopefully we get tied in with another meeting, talk about this MOU that we need to bring back before us, so we can just kind of get closure on that. I'm willing to work with whoever wants to work with me on that, but maybe we could tie it in with a meeting that we have scheduled so that we don't have to have a special meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anybody want to volunteer right now? We'll work on that. You know, Mr. Mottola?
I'll work on it too. Maybe John and I should work with the administration on it. We can get us some ideas and start floating some versions around before we actually have to meet, in case any of the rest of you have ideas that you want to.
Okay, so John agrees. Is Ms. Gardner still there?
She just ran out. She's coming right back, yep.
Okay, because do we have to vote on a number? Mr. Bateson has a comment. Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, Jim, I just didn't want to, I wanted to join in on the Love Fest too and say great job by you. But also too, to all my fellow board members, all of us over the past several weeks have just had our lives turned upside down. We all have careers, we all have families. It's been difficult on all of this. I just want to say thanks to all of you. It's not said often enough, even as a private citizen, I appreciate everything that you guys do. And being new to this board, I had no idea what goes on. And I just wanted to say thanks to all of you on behalf of the taxpayer.
Thank you very much, Ed. You know, the good news is, very shortly, these restaurants and bars will be opened up. And we'll be able to get out of our house and go visit and possibly have a drink together. So I just want to make sure that...
Generate some revenue.
Yes, we'll generate some revenue for the town. You know that... I just want to make sure we're closing up correctly. And about voting on a number, though, Linda doesn't have a number for us to vote on.
No, I will not have a number until tomorrow.
Okay, so then what do we need, what do we do to vote on the number?
It'll be the number as amended, if you want to vote on the number as amended.
Okay, why don't we at least do that? We'll make a motion that the fiscal year 2021 general fund budget will be approved as amended. Can I have a second? Second by Mr. Mottola. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That is unanimous. And the last item is to adjourn. So can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Walsh, second by Ms. Charlton. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, good night, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.